Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Strategoi video. Ryan here, back with another battletome review. Today, we'll be doing yet another order battletome for the Kharadron Overlords, and we're going to kind of reverse our roles a bit here. Today, even though Jonas is with me, we're going to be doing it with me leading the charge to make sure that we cover all of the ins and outs of KO from my slightly more experienced perspective than Jonas's. Jonas, you've played with a few of the units before, but never the army, and from what I understand, and I have just begun to finally actually play with them, but have been knowing the rules since we were in second edition and have been using them in my own games as allies as well. So, do I have that? Do I have that about right? Have you played against KO much?
Well, yeah, you've got that right. Basically, I don't feel very comfortable talking about a army that I've either not piloted myself or have played intensively against. So with KO, I think I played one or two games against them, and it wasn't in a very competitive setting. So I'm very hard pressed to say that this would be a very knowledgeable review by my end. So I'm very happy that you're taking a lead on this one. I did read all the notes and all the battletome stuff, just not all the war scrolls yet. So it's a bit of a mix and match for me. I'll be very up to date with all the starting bits, but then when it comes to the war scrolls, I'm ready to be surprised by you and by your lists. I've taken a little sneak peek already because I
Sure.
was way too curious, but I mean, I need your explanation to make sense of out of all of it.
Sure. Yeah. And, with the long term view of the channel, I think we want to keep doing eventually all battle tomes. But at this point, we're kind of just hitting the things that we know better. And then I have a feeling as it keeps developing, we'll end up covering things that, we haven't had as much playing experience with, but because we have just more sense for where the rules used to be for that army and where they're headed, I think we'll be able to speak from a stronger point of authority moving forward. For example, as we've talked about a number of times on the channel, I have literally every third edition battle tome at this point. So having those in hand, having done the math on them and studied them a bit, and then of course playing frequently, I think does eventually give you enough experience to be able to bring some amount of authority to the topic. So I don't know if that's what you have in mind for the channel, but I definitely see us heading in that direction as we're kind of
Yeah,
working our way through the order battle tomes.
personally, I'd obviously love that. I think I'd always want at least one expert present because certain content creators, and I don't mean Warhammer specific even, but just content creators as a whole feel the pressure to create content even though they're not really knowledgeable about it. And that really gets on my nerves when I hear someone speaking about Lumineth, for example, and I just feel that they have no idea what the tome is about, and their opinion is almost completely based on what's been going on online and a very quick reading of the battle tome. That just really gets on my nerves. So I would always want someone present who's played the army or piloted the army and someone who has fought against it most of the time at least.
Sure, I agree with that totally. All right, let's jump into the review of what we're going to be talking about here. As per usual, we're breaking this down with the allegiance abilities, some favorite war scrolls, important changes, a couple army lists that I've written, and some concluding thoughts. And I just have to say, I really like this cover. I don't know what your opinion is on it. I'm definitely a blues and reds kind of guy. For those of you that play Magic and know the Ravnica cycle, I really like Is It, which is also blue red. What are your feelings on this cover?
I love it. It's so good. The contrast in colors is amazing. It drew my eye to it immediately. What I love compared to the other ones were much more slick and detailed. I would say this is more almost like it's colored in with a pencil. But
Yeah,
the colors on the previous ones were just so dark. It almost always felt like they were fighting underground, even though they were flying. And this is the first time I'm actually seeing them on a clear sky.
yeah, it's almost a little bit more impressionistic also with the
Yeah.
pastels and kind of it's a beautiful or not night sky but sky, almost kind of like dusk maybe, and it's a different view than we're used to seeing of of the Mortal Realms, I feel, where it actually looks pretty positive in this scene. It looks like everything could be going okay, except for all those demons or bats or whatever it is in the sky that they're fighting
I
against.
was
But
just gonna ask, what are they fighting? My Lumith brain goes, that's phoenixes, eagles, dragons.
yeah, it could be whatever. Yeah, they've previously been only put up against Tzeentch in the art that we've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah,
Because either wars, the FOMO box we had about a year or 2 years ago was against Tzeentch. But I'm glad to see something else on the cover.
yeah. Okay.
All right, so I feel like when talking about KO, we kind of have to talk about where they came from before we talk about where they're going, because KO has traditionally been a little bit out. When we were winding up and talking before we started recording, you were mentioning that people have often compared them to Tau in 40K. Now, I don't know 40K as well as you, of course, but Tau, I understand, is mainly just an all-shooting army. There isn't really a bunch of melee in that army. Is there anything more to that comparison?
Obviously, it's guns first, so that's a primary example, comparison. But also, when I played against Tau, I always had the feeling it was quite one-sided. Either they shot me off the board quickly and it was over, or I got into melee and they died. And the one time that I played against KO where that was also the case, the resemblance was just uncanny, feeling-wise for me,
Yeah, that makes
experience-wise.
sense. Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, I've always felt like playing against KO feels a little bit like you're playing a 40K army when you should be playing Age of Sigmar, largely because they're not only super mobile, but also just particularly good at shooting. Literally every unit shoots in this army, except, with no exceptions, but you might compare them to say, well, technically everyone in Fire Slayer shoots, but that's just with their little short axes they throw. This is actual shooting. Um, that said, they've definitely not been the best shooters overall. Just because everyone in the army shoots does not mean it's like long strikes or sentinels or flamers. It's pretty toned down. And in having played my most recent tournament with them and a bunch of games with them and preparing for potentially using them for worlds, I definitely felt like the shooting was less reliable than everyone had been painting it out to be. What you pretty much used to have to do was teleport all your boats and then just focus fire on one big thing and then move on to the next thing the next turn and just hope you don't get beta attacked, return fire too hard so that you can't repeat it the following turn. And you definitely were hoping for a double turn, or at least not to get double turned yourself. A lot of this has changed, but we'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. One of the other things to point out is the mobility stuff that was always there. As you know, probably in playing the game, anyone that's played it for long enough, that dwarves' standard movement is 4 inches. Well, obviously, when GW came up with this steampunk flying army, the idea was trying to work around that shortcoming. And what you ended up getting was a bunch of vessels that could either take the guys inside them as garrisoned models, or if they had balloons, so like the engine riggers, sky wardens, and the 2 leaders that have balloons, they could hitch along, meaning they were kind of like floating along on the outside and weren't inside the boat. We'll talk more about that later. But that whole style of having the boats teleport the guys around was how you compensated for the dwarves' movement. And then you had to deal with all the garrison rules, which were complicated, still are complicated, even in the regular game, just for entering and exiting buildings and what that means. And then this teleporting thing was not a battle trait. It was instead an ability that was featured on all 3 of the flying vessels, the sky vessels as they're named, which would be the ironclad, the big one, the frigate, the middle one, and the gun hauler, which is the small one. And that meant if you took any of these units as allies, as you've mentioned, you could actually have access to all those abilities as well, meaning every turn, as long as you weren't too wounded, or if you're a gun hauler all the time, could teleport out of combat, could teleport wherever you like, outside of 9 inches and outside of 1 inches from terrain pieces. You had a ton of flexibility, which obviously was great moving into this new GHB, where jumping over and taking a random objective with one of your GCs was super easy to do. And you'll see that this has changed quite a bit. So let's get into the actual allegiance abilities as they are now. And I've started with the embarking disembarking rules because, and put an asterisk here, because they're not actually battle traits in the traditional sense. A lot of times people ask if a spellcaster knows all the lore from a given lore in a book. They like to think that if you take that unit as coalition or ally, that means they get to know the lore even though you're not playing that army. And if you've been paying attention to recent rules and FAQs, it's been ruled that those spell lores count as part of the official battle traits of that army, which means if you're not in that army itself, you can't have access to it, even though it says it on the War Scroll. They've tried to clear this up more recently by saying on the War Scroll itself, only if you're in, say, a Slaves to Darkness army does Archaon get a couple of his abilities or whatever. But this is a weird one where even in the Battletome's battle traits itself, it says that the embarking and disembarking rules, which are basically a replacement for the old garrison rules, apply even if these units are taken outside of KO, which is basically a fancy way of saying we're switching them not only from garrison to these new rules, so it totally is free to be FAQ'd outside of the garrison rules and have its own set of things, but also to say we don't want to include these on the War Scrolls. They were previously on the War Scrolls, and that got kind of long. So now they're kind of simplifying the War Scrolls. But just keep in mind, if you do take them outside of this army, they're already there. So what does it mean to embark and disembark? Well, these are the big changes we got listed here. Before, if you know your garrison rules, it was within 6 inches, not wholly within 3 inches as it is now. So what this means is this is for both getting in the boat and exiting the boat. It used to be that as long as each model was touching the 6-inch radius, it didn't have to be wholly within, just touching it, you qualified for this. Now, granted, if you stepped out, you had to be outside of the normal ranges that you had to be from enemy units, whatever the case might be at a given moment. But here, it's been changed that every single model, because it's wholly within for the unit, has to be within 3 of the boat, both stepping in and both stepping out. That is pretty restrictive in a sense, because as you'll see later, we're going to be doing a lot of stepping in, stepping out, and that could place some restrictions, especially if you take a lot of models inside that boat. How does this rule feel to you? Does that feel like a good change, or do you have any questions about how that works before we move on?
Well, when I was reading this rule, I was actually wondering how often are your units big enough that they can't fit wholly within 3 inches easily?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do. As we're going to later see, if you try to bring them into melee, and each unit still has to be within 3 inches of the unit that they're in melee with, which means I'm probably going to do a video kind of like you do with positioning of Sentinels and different Lumineth Tactica stuff, because how you move that boat into combat is going to make a difference of whether those units can actually step out. And if you choose to have them disembark but can't fit them all within 3 inches of the boat, any models that don't fit just die.
Yeah.
But the unit itself still has to be in combat with the enemy unit. So if your boat is blocking too much of the surface area to make contact with the enemy unit, you might have some problems. For example, you could take a unit of 9 Sky Wardens, a double reinforced unit, embark Zone, which is their sub-faction, and 9 32mm bases might end up proving difficult to maximize getting out of that boat, especially if they're in a frigate. So which just has a normal chariot base. So it's going to be a little trickier than I think people are expecting, especially if they're used to the very generous 6-inch bubble that we used to have.
Yeah, it's quite. It's kind of a double nerf in that regard, right? They didn't just reduce the range from 6 to 3, but it's also wholly within 3 now, which is which is very restrictive.
Yeah, so if you think about it, not being wholly within used to mean, let's say that it stayed 6 inches, or the old one was 3 inches, but the only difference was within or wholly within. The big difference there becomes that the extra range that you have for that bubble is lengthened by how big your base is, with a small little difference on that you technically have to be inside the circle. So if you have a 32mm base that meant you had basically 32 extra millimeters outside of 3 inches or 6 inches or whatever it was, because you just had to tag the object or tag the boat. You didn't have to actually be wholly within 6. So now you're left with a lot less room to work with. So one of the other things that has balanced that out, though, is that you now have more freedom to move before or after. So, for example, your unit can make a move and then step in the boat, which is kind of like how it works with the Nidus paths. You get to move first to get inside that bubble, which does give you a little more of a chance. Keep in mind that most dwarves have a 4-inch movement, but fortunately the balloons have a 12-inch movement, so they've got a good chance of getting within inside that bubble. But as another problem here is that neither the boat nor your own unit can be in combat. So the not being in combat thing is kind of a nerf, but what I see it also possibly being is a good sign that GW is heading in the direction that, as we discussed with Nick the other day in our most recent LVO review video, that there is a combat trick you can do where you can enter a garrison as the rules are currently stated and then be in combat with a unit that's within 3 inches of that building, and which kind of feels wrong because you can just kind of enter the building and never have to charge. And I think the fact that they're turning this rule, which is kind of a replacement for garrison, at least for KO, and to say that neither the boat nor the unit getting in the boat can already be in combat, is kind of heading in that direction. So I do see this as a positive in some meta sense, but it does mean you're a little more restricted from what you used to be able to do. One of the buffs that we have now is that if the ship has moved, anything that's within the boat counts as having made the same move. So, for example, if you need a charge bonus, like impact hits or something, let's say you gave one of your GCs the GC ability now, not the aspect, but the artifact that lets you do, well, actually, this might not work. But let's say you had impact hits that were written on your war scroll that aren't based off of what your charge roll is. That one needs to get ruled. I'll explain why in a second. But let's say the boat charged, and then you have a unit inside the boat that gets some kind of charge bonus. The unit inside didn't traditionally count as having charged itself, but now it does. The reason it doesn't work with that thing that I was just saying, or it might not work, which needs to get FAQ'd, is because if it's based off of what you rolled for the charge, they haven't ruled it to say yet that whatever the boat rolled is what you roll as well for the unit inside. So we don't know if that's the roll you would use, or if it counts as 0 because there is nothing that was rolled. So that's a little unclear. But I do see this as a positive. One place where you might say this is a negative is that if the boat runs, so do the guys inside, which means no one gets to shoot. Previously, if the boat ran, at least all the guys in the boat got to shoot. Fortunately, there are a bunch of ways around this now, or a couple ways around this in the army, but that does seem kind of like a nerf. And furthermore, this is a buff. Disembarking, getting out of the boat, now happens during the move phase itself, like in the middle of it, not at the end of the move phase, which is good. If you disembark and the boat hasn't moved, your guys still get to move, which is cool. And then something else that's changed is if the boat's destroyed and there are models inside, you now roll 1 die per model in the boat. Count however many ones you have, and that's how many guys you have to kill off. Meaning, if you had 2 heroes and 10 Arcanaut company in the boat, in say a frigate, and you roll 2 ones, and let's say previously you used to roll for each model 1 at a time, and that's the model that had to die. Now, if you would have rolled 2 ones for those heroes, now it's just all kind of lumped together, and you can choose to kill off the Arco, which is kind of like sacrificing the Arco for the heroes, which feels kind of flavorful with the lore, and also is a little less swingy, gives you a little more control over who dies. So that's kind of the big changes there. The garrison rules were always kind of better. I would definitely say that this is clearer, and it might take some practicing for myself as well to get used to what all the implications are. But in general, I'm pretty happy that they've cleared all this up. Do you have any thoughts about this?
The thing that came to mind when I read those rules was, if you say you're bringing 3 ships and you space them out well, there is no limitation on how many times you can embark and disembark, right?
Yeah, I think that's true.
And
Well,
the both the embarking and disembarking happens during the movement phase, not at the end, as you mentioned. And the only limitation is that your ship cannot have moved to disembark something.
yeah, those guys have to finish a move within 3, so they can't do it twice, right? So
If you chain your ships well, then why wouldn't they be able to?
I'm assuming, well, yeah, the implied text here is that this is after your move is done, and like having finished your move is a one off thing. So your move finished, then you jump in the boat, and that's after your move is already finished. So you don't qualify as being in that state anymore of having finished your move. I see what you're saying is that you could somehow finish the move and then disembark. Um,
Yeah, with let's say for with a small hero, I could chain my ships to cover a part of the battlefield, and I could basically almost teleport them because I would just move them within 3, disembark them within 3, and then within 3 of the next ship, embark them again because we're still moving, and
yeah.
it doesn't have to be at the end of the move phase. It doesn't say anywhere it has to be only one. So I feel that this. I mean, I could. I've read this 6 times now, and obviously I'm not a native English speaker, but I couldn't find anywhere why I wouldn't be able to do that.
My guess, if they don't need an FAQ for it, is that somewhere in the core rules, the definition of finishing a move is established as a one-off kind of thing.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Because it is
Yeah.
worded as
Yeah.
finishes a move.
Hmm.
I definitely think you could jump in a boat and then get out of it, but because it doesn't say instead of a move. In your movement phase, if a friendly Skyfarer unit is embarked in a transport vessel that has not yet moved in that phase, you can say the Skyfarer unit will disembark. And it says a unit that disembarks in this way can still move in the same turn.
Hmm.
That said, they already have moved, so I don't think it gives them another chance to.
Yeah.
And it doesn't count as a move itself, so it's not finishing a move. The disembarking is not finishing a move. I feel like no TO is going to rule it where you can do the unlimited, like just string yourself along
Oh yeah,
ships.
I agree. It makes no sense, but it's just the rules don't seem to prohibit me from doing that. But I'll have a quick look about finishing the move while you're getting to the code.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
So our first real battle trait, and the reason I'm not considering the other 2 battle traits is because they apply to other armies as well if they use these units. And it's basically just cleaning up the garrison rules. But stick to the code is now this used to be something that came along with each of your 6 sub factions, but there was one caveat. The old KO book was very kind of legalese esque, where there were little loopholes you could use to get out of, say, what we call taxed sub-faction enhancements like command traits or artifacts, where you could technically find a loophole that would get you out. It wasn't hard to find, but you needed to know where to look if you wanted to actually use said things. This is one of those things you couldn't get out of if you wanted to use a sub-faction, though, where every sub-faction in the lore has its own constitution, and that constitution is called a code. Each code has an article, an amendment, and a footnote, and you could even make your own custom code if you chose to forego taking any one of the 6 old sub-factions, the Skyports as they're named, which would, of course, inherently free you up to choose your own command trait and artifact, of which we had plenty, and you almost never got to use them. So this, obviously, like pretty much all 3rd edition battletomes, in fact, I think literally all, we've gotten rid of all of the taxed sub-factions that require you to take a certain command trait, artifact, mount trait, whatever. So you are choosing now for every single one of your armies, sub-faction you choose, 1 article, which is a static ability, 1 amendment, which is a once per turn ability, and 1 footnote, which is a once per game ability. So as they go through the list, they get less strong in my eyes. You could argue once per game abilities are strong, but as someone who likes a little more reliability, I always find static abilities more my thing. But I've gone ahead and broken them down now so that we can kind of choose them. They're not exactly enhancements, so we're not covering them in that section. So on the next slide, we've got our choice of 3 articles. Again, these are the static abilities. Honor is Everything gives your units that can rally a 4-up rally instead of a 6. Obviously, a lot of people like this rule in general. I think this is actually one of the most fair armies for using a rally because KO isn't using giant blocks of troops like a lot of other armies are. Technically, the biggest block of troops you can bring is 30 Arcanaut Company, but 30 Arco can't fit in a boat until they get down to 22 models, and that's only in an Ironclad and only if it's not carrying anyone else. Meaning, they're going to be moving 4 inches for quite a while. So unless you want that giant block of 300 points worth of guys just sitting on your backfield objective, moving very slowly, which they surely can do, they only have a 9-inch range on their shooting profiles. With, I think, one of their guns got boosted in that range. Let me double check that real quick. But most of their guns are sitting at a 9-inch range, which means they're not going to be pulling their weight until you get them into range at all. So you're not getting the most. Yeah, it's 9 and 15. They have 2 guns that have a 15-inch range. That used to be, I think, 12 and 18, perhaps. But now, getting that 4+ rally, you're not really bringing that big of units. The biggest Thunderers unit you can bring is half that. It's 15 when double reinforced. And the biggest of the balloon guys that you can bring, Skywardens or Engine Riggers, is 9 if they're double reinforced. So though a 4-up rally sounds amazing, you're not going to be rolling that dice before the unit's dead. So max 8 on a super large unit of Skywardens, which is good, but you're bringing 4 back, but it's not going to feel as broken as rolling that on, let's say, Squigs or something. The next ability is Master the Skies. This gives +2 inches for movement to each one of your sky vessels, which includes the gun haulers, the smaller ones that traditionally don't carry any models. This is a great article because they've really nerfed our ability to teleport. And so the army's just going to have to hold its own, moving like most armies do with flying units. So your Ironclad moves 10 inches, if not bracketed. The other 2 vehicles move 12. Technically, the gun hauler has a once per game 18-inch move that you can do. But this is bumping it up to obviously 12, 14, 14, or 20 if the gun hauler goes like super fast for that one turn. This is a great rule now that we've gotten the speed kind of nerfed, the teleports. And then Settle the Grudges is giving your whole army a +1 to wound versus in melee and shooting versus 1 unit. So you have to choose one of the enemy units, and it's kind of in line with all the or not touch the dwarven grudges is what I meant to say. Kind of theme in lore is that they always hold a grudge against something. So this is for everything, and it's not just for shooting, which is great because now we've got decent melee, which is definitely one of the bigger buffs that the army's gotten in the new book. Okay, moving on to the amendments.
So Ryan, before we move on, which one of these articles do you like the most? Master of the Skies?
It depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing a melee build, I would definitely go for Master of the Skies. And, well, it depends. Honestly, they're all good. And the good news is in one of the sub-factions, you can take a second one as well. So I mean, the 4-up rally is conditioned on that you actually think you're going to be able to make use of it. If you're taking MSU of your balloon guys that in units of 3, they're probably either going to be dead or not worth blowing a CP on to bring 1 or 2 models back. It's one of those things where unless you're bringing big units of Thunders, at least 10-man units, I probably wouldn't bother with that one. Yeah. And then +1 to wound is great, but it's only versus 1 unit. So if your opponent doesn't have any one particular unit that's worth trying to bring down or focus fire on like that, then you wouldn't. Maybe that's not so handy.
Yeah, this would change the game if you could choose after deployment, right?
Yes. Let's see the wording on that. Oh, if you could choose which article. Yes, you do get to choose the unit after deployment, but you don't get to choose the article. One thing that is worth pointing out about this +1 to wound, though, is it's as close as we really get now to what used to be either gold. And I meant to mention on the previous slide, but it's something we totally lost, which was essentially KO's version of what Lumineth had. Of course, technically KO came first, battletome-wise, where each unit that was a hero or a sky vessel or had 10 models in it or more got a share of either gold. Once per game, once per phase, you could use for once per game for each unit and once per phase in general. You could use one. It would lower the bravery just like the Ether Quartz does. But instead of using a list of things that is in the book, like with Lumineth, it just allowed you to use one of the existing game triumphs, which previously was a larger list, and then in 3rd edition got pulled back to 3, most of which don't apply to your units. It was mainly +1 to wound that you were doing it for, not really for battle shock. And so you didn't even want to be in combat, so you weren't doing it to reroll charges. And then they added a couple for specific heroes to the Bellicor, Broken Realms Bellicor book, but you just didn't see those being used a whole lot. So I'm glad they got rid of it, but the +1 to wound is a little bit missed, especially on your sky vessels. So this is about as close as we get to it, is being able to target down one grudgy unit if you really miss that +1 to wound.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't find anything about finishing a move, so maybe someone else can point it out to me, but I think it could use an FAQ either way, to be honest. But yeah, let's move on to the Iron Sky commands. Oh, of course, there's still 2 more. Stick to the code, of course, yeah.
So we've got amendments, which are, again, the next tier down, once per turn. There's always take what you're owed, is that you choose every turn you choose 1 Artco unit, and then they are counting, and this is every turn in your hero phase, so not every turn, but every one of your hero phases, they're counting as 2 bodies on an objective. So obviously this is build dependent, whether you're or not. Again, like I said, if you bring 30 Artco to bump them up to 60, that's only going to work if you're okay with them not being in a boat, or if they lose at least 8 guys. So maybe it's not as strong as it seems. The biggest unit you're probably bringing right off the bat is 20. So bumping them up to 40 is kind of cool if you want to go for like a max clown car kind of vibe, old school 1st edition KO style. But otherwise, it's just for Arco. It's not working on any other units. Prosecute all wars with all haste is once per turn in your movement phase. This is a 2d6 run roll for a unit instead of 1d6, which combined with what I said earlier, that we can use some run and shoot, run and charge rules. This is actually pretty strong, especially if you're trying to get into combat or trying to get over to an objective. And then the last one is unquestionably the worst. Trust to your guns is once per your shooting phase, you get to reroll 1 missile attack to hit 1. So you only get to reroll 1 die, and it's only if it's a 1 and only in the shooting phase. And of course, you're probably going to choose that on something that has very few shots, that has like really high damage or high rend, that you just want to push it through and not pull the techless. I mean, I'm sure if you could reroll the to hit shot, you would take it, but I don't think it's better than the other 2 rules, especially the 2d6 run roll. What are your thoughts on these?
I mean, the last one just seems super bad. I think they're like, we don't want rerolls, but if we're giving them a reroll, it's only just the 1 reroll. I was wondering if there were any guns that were worth taking this on, even on the big guns. I don't think they are. It is worthwhile, but there is that. Honestly, I'm a movement kind of guy, so I usually go with the second one. The 2d6 run roll seems useful. How many times have I thought, am I going to spend a command point here to run the auto 6 just because I need 2 more inches or something? And now with a 2d6 run roll, that is, much less likely that you're going to need a command point. And you're going to need your command points for your take to the skies anyways.
Yep. And another thing to keep in mind is that you still don't count as models when you're inside a boat on objectives, although boats have been upgraded. The 2 bigger boats have been upgraded to counting as 5 as though they're monsters. So that's good. But so if your Arco unit's inside a boat and hasn't disembarked, then this rule is not going to do anything for you. So if the first one had been changed so that you can make any unit count as 2 times bodies, including ships or something, that would have been awesome. And then that could actually swing some turns, I think. But as it currently stands, it's list dependent. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the footnotes. The footnotes are once per game abilities. So there's no reward. What's the rest of that? Without risk. Is a once per game 3d6 18-inch charge. All the normal rules for a 3d6 charge, which is pretty great if you're trying to get a unit in there. And keep in mind, we have one great engine work for a ship that lets you roll essentially the ogre impact hits. So every 4 up for what your modified charge roll was does a wound. So this is particularly good in combo with that. Then we've got there's no trading with some people. This rule has definitely gotten more flavorful than what it used to be. But what it does now is basically once per battle again in the enemy shooting phase, if one of your Skyfarer's units got targeted by any shooting attacks in that phase, that unit can immediately shoot. So I'm calling it return fire. The weird thing about this is it's a Skyfarer thing, and most people are going to be shooting your boats because if your guys are in the boats, they're getting +1 to save, -1 to hit, just like in normal garrison rules. And in addition to that, the boats have longer range. So in general, a lot of the range, this is a spoiler alert, but a lot of the ranges of different units have gotten shorter, especially the guys in the boats or the non-boats themselves, which means if they shot you from 24 inches away, none of your guys them. You're not going to be able to return fire. You don't have to return it back to the unit that shot you, but you do have to return it to someone. And that could very well mean that there's no unit that's within, say, 12 inches or 15 inches. If they're just outside 15, they're pretty much outside the bubble that you've got available to you. So I'm not as crazy about this rule. I think it's kind of situational. But, I mean, you get to choose when it happens, so you can wait, but maybe you're already whittled down and you're not going to have as much fire to return. And then the last one, which is the one that they talked article on the preview article on Warhammer Community, was without our ships, we are not. This is a once per battle ability for one sky vessel to receive 2 commands, which is, spoiler alert here, also the only way that you can go back to disengaging and flying high, like all the boats used to be able to do by default on the War Scroll. This is the only way that you can have a ship leave combat and go teleport somewhere, which is kind of a bummer, and now it's a once per game thing. But this is really good for making KO have to fight on everyone else's terms, which I think ultimately is good for the game. Speaking of which, that brings us right up to the Iron Sky commands if you don't have any questions about these 3.
No, it's just I love the entire idea of the code. You being able to kind of mix and match play styles and list building, this is right up my alley. Even if they weren't just metal balloon dwarves, I would be all over this army, I think.
You can always custom make your own version of it. Doesn't have to be metal, I guess.
Yeah, the thing is, I really like the idea of them. I love the concept. It's quite original. It's very steampunky. I love it. It's just not my style personally.
Sure.
And too little magic, to be honest.
Yeah, literally none except for selling a bottle, which of course we'll get to.
The Iron Sky commands.
Yeah, so now, like I said, this is the only way that we have access to the old things that we used to be able to do, which you'll see here is fly high and disengage is the last 2, and combat landing is the first option, which is new. It kind of replaces an old battle or trait or from a sub-faction. But essentially, so they kind of, I had a wish list of things I wanted them to do to this army, and I wanted to make each of the boats either elite or totems so that they could issue commands. They kind of met me in the middle. They didn't actually end up doing that, even though there's clearly a crew of thinking humans or dwarves inside the vehicles that could clearly issue some amount of commands. But what they ended up doing is saying the only commands the boats can give themselves are these 3. All 3 of them happen in the movement phase, which means you're not going to be able to auto-run any of them if you want to do these things, except for the one thing that I just said, the ships thing, where they can receive 2 commands in one phase. That's the only way you can do an auto-run and do one of these things. So it's definitely restrictive. The only other unit that can issue these commands is an admiral, which is good because, as we'll see, the admiral gets to identify which boat he likes or which is his flagship, and he gets to issue once per turn a free CP to that boat, which works well with these commands. So let's talk about them in order here. So combat landing is going to be an end of the movement phase thing, and this lets your sky vessel disembark any amount of units you want that are embarked in it, but they can't move, obviously, because it's the end of the movement phase. This is the only way to get around that problem after the boat is already moved. If the boat hasn't moved, they can disembark freely and then move on their own. But this lets you basically teleport. Well, you could only teleport if you do the once per game to a CP thing here. But let's say that they auto ran or something to get. Actually, they couldn't auto run either. Let's say you rolled a good run roll and then put them on an objective and then let the guys step out. And remember, they're not stepping out 6 anymore. They're only stepping out wholly than 3. Then you could let them step out after this and go claim that objective. This is going to be particularly popular, I think, for GC type missions, Galician Champion type things, where you need to go grab an objective with the GC, because remember, they don't count if they're on the inside of the boat, and we've lost all of the hitching ability where the guys who were in the one GC, the engine master in dirigible suit, doesn't count as being outside the boat as he flies along with it. He's inside it now, which is a change. All the balloon guys ride inside now. That means that you don't have these easy battle tactics to get with KO the way we once did. And now you're kind of back down to maybe wanting to take that master, which is interesting. This is your other way to get around that if you need to do it in one given turn. But again, you're probably not doing it with a teleport. How do you feel about that move and the fact that they've turned that into a command ability that's in the move?
Honestly, I love it's as you said. Basically, it forces KO to fight on everyone else's terms, and I like that, because then it kind of restricts the feel back part of the army. The feel bad part of the army, I think. But also it makes your command point usage much more tactical, and you're really need to think beforehand what kind of move you want to do, and that I feel that's also quite flavorful, actually, because you've got all these captains and admirals flying those ships or maneuvering those ships. It makes sense that they're not able to navigate all these things at the same time with every single ship. It makes sense that some get different orders because it's only a couple of captains or one admiral figuring out the movement for the battle. So I love it, actually.
Right. Fortunately, the army has a number of ways of getting extra CPs. But keep in mind, if you do the heroic action, it can only be issued by that person, and boats can't do their own heroic actions because they're not heroes. And none of the other heroes besides admirals can issue any of these 3 commands. So if you really need one of these, you're wanting to keep an admiral either in the boat or babysitting the boat somehow, so that if that's going to be the guy who's trying to get your extra CP from the heroic action. So the fly high works exactly how it used to, except that you can't start that fly high while you're in combat. So you do a teleport, and of course it brings everyone along that's inside the boat. And you can't end within 1 inch of an objective. So the center point of an objective, which is easy to forget, and easy to forget, you can't end within 1 inch of a terrain piece, which is as if the boat is trying to be careful about not accidentally hitting the terrain piece, like Titanic style. And this is used also at the end of your movement phase. So you're not going to be able to, you need to think tactically about this too. Previously, we used to just fly high whenever we wanted to and just go put all our boats wherever we wanted. I think this is also good for streamlining the movement phase for KO, so that it's not necessarily as long and tedious as it could be before, because you had too many options. Now you've only got 1 boat that can do this. The interesting thing is you can do it after having moved. Now, can you think of a strategic reason why you would want to have had done a normal move and then fly high?
Is this a question because you don't know, or is this a teacher Ryan question where you're putting me on the spot?
I want to see if it's obvious. Yeah, it's a teacher moment, let's call it.
No, not right away. Endless spells, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Imagine you're trying to block out a redeploy or trigger a redeploy or fake someone
Oh
out. So
yeah,
you
ooh, that is clever. Yeah,
make them go move in a direction they whatever, and then change, quote unquote, change your mind and go
oh, I
fly
love
high.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one here is disengaging, and this one is the only one that's in your movement phase, not at the end. This is the same thing about a sky vessel that is not yet moved, retreating. Basically, you get to retreat, but then still shoot and not charge. It doesn't say retreat and charge. Of course, since we're a shooting unit, that's great. And keep in mind, it even says and the units embarked in it. So everything that's inside the boat can retreat. And because it's a flying movement, it's a normal retreat, which is going to be the boat's own movement, which is also a reason you want to take that extra movement or article. You're getting further away from combat. They can redeploy to this, of course, but you don't have to be outside 9 inches like we usually traditionally did with the disengage. Technically, the disengage also was a retreat and shoot, but a lot of people just used it as a fly high as well. So you're only doing one of these things unless you use that once per game thing, since they're all in the movement phase. And keep in mind, if you take these guys as coalition or allies, you're not getting access to any of these. So the ships cannot issue themselves any amount of commands outside of KO. In all, how do you feel about these? Is there anything we haven't talked about that you feel is important to mention?
Yeah, well, I kind of went ahead and jumped ship a little bit. Or no, that's not the right expression. I just really wanted to make that pun, but it's not the right expression. I kind of skipped to the end there, and already gave my opinion on the entirety of the idea here with all the commands. Obviously, the fly high was majorly annoying to me when I played against it, and it was the one thing that I knew about before I played my first game against these guys. Just because it is so strong, having teleport units. And you know, when you've seen any of the videos where I'm part of the conversation, I'm always very big on teleports. So the fly high being just a one-time thing is good in my eyes. Also, as we mentioned before, just for balance sake. But I love that you still got the options to do all these shenanigans. And they all are quite flavorful. They're strong and flavorful, and I really like that.
Yeah, I'm happy for the balancing of the army. It definitely changes the playstyle in a severe way, which all you'll see with my lists. I'm trying to get around those problems, or just think of the army in a new way now. The either gold being gone is not really a problem. The changes to embarking and disembarking, not a problem. But this is definitely a weird kind of. You could call it a nerf, because it is on the surface of things, but we definitely gained a lot of other things in reciprocation, and I definitely think the army is going to be stronger than and more flexible, more modular than it previously was.
Yeah, it does. It does strongly alter their identity, right? They've gone from a hit and run kind of army where you're almost solely winning in the movement phase and a little bit of a shooting phase, obviously, to a army that also has to fight in a combat phase now and really has to put in the work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, shall we move on?
Yeah.
Sub-faction time.
So we still got the same 6 sub-factions, all of which begin with Barak. Barak Nar, Zulfin, Zoln, Urbaz, Mornar, and Thrying is at least how I pronounce them. I used to have a favorite here, and I'd be curious to see if you can guess which one my favorite was if I quickly describe them. Barak Nar was the head city and was based off of dispelling and bringing extra CPs. Zilfin was the mobility big frigate city. Barak Zoln was the melee-oriented city. Urbaz was the Either Gold-oriented city that was built around trade. Mornar was kind of the Ulgu version of a skyport where they're kind of the scary dwarves. And then Barak Thrying was the coalition one that lets you bring your Dwarden allies along. Yeah. Do you have a sense for which one was probably my favorite?
I think you had my inner Rhinet coalition.
Mm-hmm.
So
100%. Yeah. And as we'll see, this has been super hard nerfed to the point where it's easily the worst sub-faction.
Yeah, makes little sense now, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Mm-hmm.
But let's go ahead and hit them one at a time here. So Barak Nar. This ability is basically an updated version of what they used to have. They had this same thing where at the start of your hero phase, roll a die for each friendly Barak Nar hero on the battlefield, including those that are embarked, and for each 4+, you receive 1 extra command point. This was true before, but only at the very beginning of the game, because it was a 2nd edition battletome, and CPs didn't get generated like they do now. And so you could save them for however long. So if you took 6 heroes and got an average of 3 of these, you'd be maybe saving those CPs. And of course, there weren't as many command abilities to use back then. But Barak Nar has been more or less unusable as it was in the 2nd edition book, because this ability wasn't helping you that much. And then all it used to give you, as you see in the things we lost category here, was unbinds and dispels for all heroes and a couple battle shock buffs, which really wasn't worth it, because if a Spelldom army was going to end up beating you, KO's not really trying to win on that front of denying people stuff. So that wasn't really enough of a reason to take them. It still unlocks Grunstock Thunderers as battle line. And as I've mentioned here, it's the sub-faction that's locked down for Brock Grungson and Bjorgen Thundrik, 2 of our 3 named characters, one of which is the Underworld's Warband group, Thundrik's Profiteers, which, especially for Brock, we're going to see later, has given us a reason to reconsider taking Barak Nar. Plus, like I said, we're pretty CP hungry, and we're bringing a lot of heroes, actually. So there's a good chance you're getting at least 3-4 heroes in a list, and you're generating 2-ish per turn, which is definitely not bad considering how much we're trying to use them. And Thunderers are not a bad battle line. Do you have any thoughts about this sub-faction?
You mentioned all my thoughts in the last 30 seconds.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
So good job. Let's move on. Okay. Zilfin
cool.
time.
Now, anyone that has played against KO in the 3rd edition and maybe longer knows that this is basically the only sub-faction that anyone used to take.
Yeah.
Barak Zilfin was the broken one. It was the change host of Tzeentch for KO. It was the problematic one. It had all the buffs and no real strong downsides. The big thing it did, the thing that it currently does, it used to do as well, which is that you get 1 additional Great Engine, which is a Sky Vessel mount trait for your army. You automatically get 1, just like all other mount traits, but this gave you an additional 1 without having to take a command on or Warlord battalion. But it also gave you, this is the big broken thing, a once per game hero phase move, which included flying a ship high and dropping usually some kind of horrible endless spell in front of your opponent's nose before they could do anything about it. It also gave an auto 6-inch run for all units, which is good that they lost this, because now you have very easy run and charge and run and shoot, which would mean everyone's basically just flying max speed. And it had reroll 1s to hit for all Sky Vessels versus flying units, which is Nighthaunt's worst nightmare here, because it's the whole army. And it also unlocked Archanaut Frigates' battle line, which it still does. I actually still think that that's almost unto itself worth taking this sub-faction. I don't know that it's the strong sub-faction it used to be, but keep in mind in the GC world that we're living in right now, if you unlock a boat as battle line and your heroes are by default sitting in the boat, they are 100% within 1 inch of the boat and therefore can never be targeted.
Yep.
And you're trying to keep the heroes in the boat. So in this current edition, unless they've got sharpshooters, they need to just focus down the boat. But guess what? Our boats got way tankier. So I still think this is good. And the Great Engine works, especially if they're applied to the Ironclad, are quite good. But it doesn't have any of the broken stuff from before, which I think everyone that's ever played KO is going to be rejoicing. And I think all KO players should be happy about too, because it gave us internal balance again, where you feel free to choose other sub-factions and build other lists that don't all do the same thing every single game.
Yep. Okay, Barak Zon?
Right. Yeah. Fun fact, sometimes you notice that the Warhammer guys end up stealing what appears to be Dutch words for random things. And Barak Zon, zon in Dutch is the word for sun, as in S-U-N, the giant ball of fire in the sky, not your your son's son, as in your lineage.
We get
and,
it.
Yeah, and just to be clear, you speak Dutch, but this is also what this is based off of here. These guys flew maybe a little too close to the sun, and you'll see in my list name that I made for this sub-faction that I kept there.
Clever pun.
Yeah. They've always been the melee army. They did previously have a once per battle hero phase disembark and some random melee buff. But they've gained some great new stuff where all Skyfarers now, not just what used to be most of your army or most of your Skyfarers plus Skywardens got extra bonuses if they did a charge. Now everyone's just default getting +1 to hit and wound rolls with melee weapons after doing a charge, which, as you're going to see pretty soon, they've really buffed how our charging works in this army, which is great. And this sub-faction unlocks Skywardens, which are our best melee unit, as battle line. They used to be unlocked by taking a Engine Master with Dirigible Suit as your general, as well as the engine riggers were unlocked as battle line. But now this is the only way you get them. So this is particularly strong and really pushes them over the edge. This is the best place you can put them for getting the most amount of damage out of them. And as we'll see with how the frigates have been reworked, this is super strong. You lost a once per battle hero phase disembark, which is basically what that command ability is now. And then, like I said, you lost some random melee buffs. But otherwise, this is a great sub-faction now. And I always wanted to play weekly. Has something
you
like
dropped off there for a sec. You always wanted to play?
I always wanted to play this sub-faction.
Yeah.
It seemed really cool because it was balloon-centric. And Tom Lyons from Warhammer Weekly, I know, has like something like 24 of the balloon guys, maybe more. And he was trying to play a list with a bunch of them before, but they just got nerfed too much and it didn't really make sense anymore. So I think he'll be pretty happy with how it turned out. Yeah, so Barak Zone, definitely strong.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. Okay, Urbaz.
All right, Urbaz. Used to be the one that interacted the most with Ether Gold, but now that Ether Gold's gone, it's definitely been reworked. With this one, I actually think it's one of the best sub-factions because you get to pick one additional article for your army. And remember, articles were the group of 3 abilities that are static. So that's choosing a 4+ rally, +2-inch move, or why am I blank? Oh, +1 to wound against a given target for your whole army. Yeah. Taking 2 of these is great. Those are the kinds of buffs a lot of armies would love to have. And it's super strong, gives you some more flexibility. It also unlocks Grunstock gun haulers as battle line, which are not my favorite unit. They don't quite do what I want them to do anymore. But I can totally see taking them because they give your big boats a 6+ ward and are your fastest units, technically. They've, of course, lost their better Ether Gold interaction because Ether Gold's gone. And kind of a hidden benefit that they had was, as I mentioned before, back in the day of 2nd edition tax enhancements, so like artifacts and command traits, this was the most flexible sub-faction for getting the loopholes. So a lot of people would choose them if they wanted to use the generic command traits and artifacts that were used in the army. So they don't need to do that anymore, but this was, I think, a popular second choice after Zilfin just for getting a little more freedom to choose. So, yeah, what do you think of getting that one extra article? Do you feel like taking a second in and of itself worth choosing this sub-faction for?
Well, I would always pick the +2 movement because I'm a movement guy, but then I'm not actually sure whether I want the rally or the +1 to wound more. I think it's cool. It's just it's a little bit like the Barak Zilfin one. It's fine. It's just a little bit boring. Can I say that? Like it just doesn't give you that feeling where you feel very good about your specific sub-faction. While Barak Zon, for example, you'll always think, oh yes, of course, I can add +1 to hit and to wounds every time.
Yeah, but your ships don't get that. And if you're taking an all-ship list, or as you'll see, the Thunderers and the Arco...
Oh yeah, I'm definitely not saying that you should always take Barak Zon. I mean, the Barak Zon one just gives you a better feeling when you're playing a Barak Zon list, is what I'm saying.
Sure, 100%. Yeah, I maybe they don't lean super hard into what this list should be. I feel like it's more just kind of a generic thing. You know,
Exactly,
like
that's what I mean. Yeah.
and I feel like that could be stronger than Barak Zilfin getting that extra article because you can get an extra engine work simply by taking a command entourage or warlord.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's very handy and it's nifty. It's just it doesn't feel amazing to use. That's all I'm saying. But it is strong. It is strong, definitely. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
Um,
Mornar.
Mornar definitely has gotten a bit of a glow up here because um, even though they've lost a pregame sky vessel teleport, after which you weren't allowed to move the following phase, so it kind of negated itself, and they had a first turn run and shoot and did a little bravery bomb stuff. I never saw anyone really taking Barak Mornar, but what they've given them now is anytime an enemy model, and the model is important here, it's not the unit. So if like your champion in a unit is not technically within this 12-inch bubble, then that just because the unit was
Yeah.
within 12 doesn't mean it goes off. But anytime an enemy model issues a command with 12 inches of a Barak Mornar unit on a 5+, that command is not received and the CP is lost. And this means if you spread yourself out a lot, they might not be getting their CPs off in crucial moments. One out of every 3 times they're not getting that CP off, which is almost kind of like a roar. And the fact that your whole army triggers it, it's not just sky vessels or or your skyfarers or heroes. I think this is a really strong rule in the right place. It's kind of obviously it's a passive rule that you're not really going to feel its presence until you get lucky on those rolls. But I think Nighthaunt has something like this with the what's her name, Lady Olinder, right? And that tends to make a difference. And this is every single unit has this, not just one.
This is my favorite one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
No-
Elaborate a little more on that.
So to continue the point I was making on the previous one, Barak Urbaz is probably a safer pick here because you're at least guaranteed to get value out of your sub-faction. But Mornar, this is the kind of ability that I like, right? Because when it goes off, it feels so good that you chose Barak Mornar, right? It's like, god damn, I ruined that guy's plans. And I know that's a little bit of the Lumineth player in me, but I just love the mind game aspect of this ability. Once again, it doesn't only make your games stronger, but it also forces your opponent to really think about, do I even want to take that risk? But it's because it's not just that the command's not just not received, but it's also still used and the CP is lost, which is rough, like very, very rough. And it does force you to come closer a little bit, which is not always tied to the KO playstyle previously, I think. But now with the more combat-oriented vibe the armies got going, I really like this one. That means all-out defense, all-out attack, even immune to bravery is just, it's up in the air.
Yeah.
Pun intended once again. You're never sure that your opponent is going to get that, and it is going to screw with your opponent's mind so badly.
Yeah, and it's also very flavorful lore-wise because they're the ones that come from
The shadow,
either Shire
yeah.
or Ogu, and they've got this kind of scary dwarf pirates thing going on. So
Yeah, super cool.
yeah. So Leia, and then the other thing I'd like to mention, we've got this random that I think was brought out for like a commemorative Warhammer store thing or something at one point, but Dreki Flint could have been a really bad just add-on character, but he's actually pretty good. And he had the rule that you'll see with the add where he gets to choose a flagship before anyone else got it, where only in Barak Mornar does he get to choose a frigate to be his frigate. It gets reroll runs and charges, and its combat damage is doubled, but they're on 4s and 4s, so don't get too excited about that. But basically, it's the only place where he gets to do what he wants to do, and he can actually destroy someone's artifact. If he's in combat with a hero on a 3-up, he destroys their artifact. And he gets to do extra wounds against a monster he's in combat with. And he has a good weapon profile. I think he's got -2 rend on his shooting profile with a bunch of attacks. He's not bad at all. The model's really cool. and it works really well with this sub-faction. So if you like the flavor of that, it's not a bad choice. He's not buffing you as much as Brock is going to be doing later, which we'll see, but it's still a cool, flavorful addition. He's basically like an admiral without technically being one.
Yeah, so, I love it. It's very cool. Okay, yeah. Thrang or Trine?
Oh, yeah. Oh boy, this is such a bummer for me. So again, what they used to be able to do was take coalition. If you're not familiar with coalition rules, it lets you take an unlimited number of points so long as you meet the drops limit, which is 1 to 4. It used to include any order Dwarden, but they eventually worded it so that Gotrek doesn't count anymore. But it basically means all of your cities Dwarden and all of your Fire Slayers, which I always thought maybe taking Magmadroths would be cool. I had a list with 2 or 3 Magmadroths. Oh, yeah. Which is super flavorful because these are the ones that still believe in Grimnir, and they still worship the gods a little bit of the KO. The rest of KO is basically atheist.
Money.
Yeah, and they also had Fight on Death and a bunch of grudge abilities. Like it was and your guys used to get those grudge abilities. The coalition guys. So it was super flavorful. I love soup armies, and they took this totally away from us. Now it's like what they did to Legion of the First Prince, where you used to be able to have so many more options, and now they're just allies. They're not even coalition anymore, so you have a points limit still. And all that they give you in return is that allied Dwarden priests know a unique prayer, which is basically you choose one of your Artco or Grunstock unit or Grunstock Thunderer units within 16 inches, and they get to do mortal wounds on unmodified 6s to hit that's equal to the damage characteristic, and only in the shooting phase. Now these guys aren't good in the melee phase anyway, so who cares? But you'd think that this, okay, so it's basically curse, right? But instead of choosing your target unit and within 9 inches, well, it's 16, so that's better. And it's buffing your own unit. Keep in mind that most allied Dwarden priests only move 4 inches, can't go in your boats, can't keep up with the boats unless you choose the guy, the Rune Smiter that's on map, who goes, I think, 12 inches.
Yeah.
And he could maybe keep up, but at the end of the day, is it worth bringing the dude? Just so that they get 6s to hit that do a mortal wound instead, not in addition. It's not like curse in that sense. And it does equal to the damage characteristic, so you might be getting excited, like, oh, hey, do these profiles, maybe you've got a lot of guys that are doing 2 damage on their weapon or 3 damage. Thunderers have one that does 3 or D3, if I'm not mistaken, and Artco has one that does 2, and that's 1 attack per. Let me double check that real quick. Artco has 1 attack that does D3, and Thunderers have 1 attack that does 3, straight up 3. That's not really making that big of a difference. That's not moving the needle all that much. If they had said your ships get to do it, or I don't know, maybe all units within a certain range, I would actually entertain this idea. But even then, there aren't that many good Dwarden priests out there. The Rune Lord in cities is which they've just put in that Regiments of Renown as well, and I think he'll be living on through the new cities book. He's actually pretty good, but he's super slow. Or you could, like I said, you got the Rune Smiter or Magmadroth. He's probably your best choice. And then you got the ground version of the Rune Smiter, who can technically dig himself through a tunnel, so he could teleport to one of your boats, or where these guys are standing, if you really want. And then your only other option is the remaining Rune guy. I forget what his name is, Rune Master maybe, in Fire Slayers, who, if he's standing within 3 inches of your general, gives him like an extra CP. So maybe you're taking him for that. But again, your general's probably moving around in a boat, and you're not going to benefit from it very much. So this is a lose-lose to me. Like, this is a total just fluff, take it because maybe it reminds you of what it used to be. But I'm just super disappointed with what they did with Trying.
Yeah. It always feels bad. It feels bad when they strip an army of a strong rule, but it feels even worse when you know that certain people have probably built this entire force around a specific sub-faction that was not optimal to begin with.
Yeah.
And now are forced to really think about which way they want to go with all those models that they can't even use anymore. Right. The First Prince thing is a great example or a great comparison by you, because That is the same feeling that I had. I was slowly inching towards the idea of a Legion of the First Prince list, but I was always afraid that this was going to happen, and it did happen. And now, once again, one of my friends loved the idea of just combining all those dwarves. I love that idea as well. And now knowing that it's out, it does hurt a little bit more than losing a strong rule, for example.
Yeah, so what this officially does is lock in that Fire Slayers is the home for a dwarf soup army, because even though they don't have coalition either, they do have the ability to give the runes, the once per turn rune abilities, to every single Dwarden unit you take, including Gotrek, cities, and KO. So if you want to do Dwarden soup, now the only place to do it is Fire Slayers. Yeah, it's a bummer, but the rest of the book is good. So moving on to happier pastures, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So as an overview.
Yeah. So as we said, Barak Nar's got extra CPs per hero, Thunderer Battle Line, and Brock, which we'll see what his benefit is later. Barak Zilfin's giving you extra mount trait, the engine works, and a frigate battle line. Barak Zone has the melee charge bonus, and Skywarden is his battle line. Urbaz has an extra article, and then Gunhauer battle line. Then we've got the two that don't have extra battle line, which would be Mornar, which negates enemies' command abilities, and Drekki Flint, and then Barak Thrine, which has a special mortal wounds prayer. What would you say your top three are here?
Well, Mornar is top one, both for how cool it is and just the flavor of it, definitely. Barak Nar probably second. I like extra CPs, and Thunderers as battle line is very strong. And then, you make a very good point about the frigate battle line for Zilfin. It is so boring, the extra mount rate. So let's go for Barakzon, because I love the idea of a shooting army and then just saying, nope, I'm going to go fight with my balloon spear guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, Mornar, Nar, and Zon, I guess.
I feel like those are popular choices. I would actually put Urbaz as my go-to generic one, because you can get that Thunderer battle line through a command trait, which we'll be talking about shortly. But I agree with you that Barak Nar is also tempting. I've definitely written a Barak Nar list already.
The thing is that the extra CPs per hero is just, sure, you'll take maybe 3 heroes in each list or even more, but it's not that strong compared to certain things that are guaranteed, like the Urbaz one.
Yeah. I just feel like sometimes the Urbaz situation is going to end up being, it's going to be hard to choose which article you want, and you really can see yourself needing both. If you don't need two, then certainly don't waste your time on it. Yeah. But yeah.
Well, the thing that is very good about this entire slide is there's only one that I would write off, honestly.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, I used to be a big stand for that one, so they really had a chance to be a knocking all 6 out of the park. But yeah, oh well.
Yeah, I get the feeling that the Barak Thrine thing is a little bit of like the Dwarven subfaction in Sylvaneth, Ironbark.
Oh yeah, right.
That's the exact same feeling that I have right here. It's like, that used to be very flavorful, and now it's just very weird.
Yeah, I'd already forgotten what you were talking about.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah. So command enhancements. We got command traits. I'm just calling them mount traits because I think that just lets us all know what we're really talking about here. All right, command traits.
Let's fly through these because you've got to go in an hour or so, and we still have 2 lists to talk about as well.
Yeah, this will go pretty quick, I think.
Okay.
So I've limited down the command traits to 4 out of the 6. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but X Grunstock is definitely a utility one, which makes your Thunderers and Gun Haulers, which are both Grunstock units, have that keyword now. They make them battle line, and your general can issue 1 free command ability to them per turn. First off, turning on more battle line is always something I'm excited about, and the book has gotten better about that, and it was already pretty good about battle line option before. And then getting an extra free command ability per turn, so enemy's turn as well, is pretty good. I don't know if I'm really going to be using them but certainly on my Thunderous units, I could totally see. So if you're leaning towards either one of those, or you're having a hard time hitting all of your battle line units restrictions with, but also taking some of these units and they weren't currently turned on in either Barak Nar for Thunderers or Barak Urbals for Gun Haulers, then I could definitely see yourself taking this to turn them back on.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of the first two, right?
Yeah. Cunning Fleet Master. This one is amazing, but it has a strong restriction. At the end of enemy movement phase, one sky vessel within 12 inches of this general, not wholly within, and more than 12 inches from enemy units may make a normal move. This is big. Obviously, your opponent can shut it out by moving, just tiptoeing into 12 inches of any of your sky vessels. But you're getting a free up to, think about it, if you stack this with the plus 2-inch movement, and then we've got an extra engine work that can give one boat an extra 2-inch movement. So you can get one boat up to extra 4. You could be moving a frigate 16 inches for free in the enemy movement phase, which totally takes it. As long as they didn't get within 12 inches, of course, if they were waiting to get a charge or something, then they would have had to have ended because it's the end of the movement phase. But they would have already been in there. But it's not the worst thing in the world. It's definitely giving you more board presence, and it's kind of making up for the fact that we used to be able to teleport. So I see this one as almost an auto take for a lot of people's lists, especially if they're trying to be as mobile as previously. What do you feel about this one?
It is super cool. Yeah, I loved it. I loved it the moment I read it. I just wish they had given this to Foxes in Lumineth.
Instead of what they have?
They have nothing now.
It's still at the end of your own shooting phase, right?
Well, yeah, okay, sure. Yeah.
So, I mean, this is still similarly at the end of a specific enemy phase. But obviously that move can get you outside of a 3d6 charge range. Obviously, you wouldn't have been within a 12-inch charge range. It can definitely move you outside shooting range thing. Magic range for the following turn. It can put you on an objective. There's so many things you can do with this ability. Super good.
Yeah, I think the only thing that you're probably not going to get out of this is you're probably not going to be able to hide behind terrain with this, because most terrain is not big enough to hide your gigantic zeppelins.
Yeah, that's true. And a lot of people are ruling terrain pieces as you can see over them as long as your unit flies. If the target flies, or
also, you.
So the next one is Scholar and Arcanaut. Just gives you an extra footnote in your army that you don't have. Remember, the footnotes are the once per game abilities.
Yes.
So that was giving you a 3d6 charge at 18 inches. It was giving you the return fire thing I was saying for a Skyfarer's unit that gets shot at. And it was giving you the once per game 2d6. Once per game 2 commands to receive. If you're really relying on that and want one of the other, I could totally see this as being an option. But we have another way of getting an extra footnote. So I don't see this one as being quite as strong. But if you take a code right, you can get around this problem. But I still see it as worth mentioning here. And the last one is just a reiteration of the Barak Zilfin ability. Old Skydog gives you 1 extra great engine work for your army. So you can get, if you're in Zilfin, and even with a 1-drop list, you can technically get 3 great engine works if you take this, which is not bad. That said, it wouldn't be a 1-drop list if you're taking more than 1 ironclad. So that'd be an ironclad plus 2 of other boats would be getting 1. So pretty strong.
Yeah, cool.
What do you have any other thoughts about these before we move on?
Same thing as I always do. It's good. Both are very dependable, but a little bit boring. But yeah, I mean, just for tournament and competitive play, I love it. It's just, I don't think there's anything that would keep me away from the first two. Especially the second one is just, I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, it's kind of default. It's hard to argue with.
Yeah. Okay. Artifacts.
Hey, artifacts are less strong. I'm not as big of a fan of these, and I would say the first 2 are easily the choices you're most likely to see.
Yeah. You did a good job trying to minimize the text here, because good lord, the names on these artifacts are insane.
Oh yeah, a lot of the KO lore where they has this kind of like brand name in front of some of them, like Blazebeard and Sons Drac Hobbler Magbolus.
Yeah.
They all have like a nickname and like the name of the son that made, or the company them, and blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
But the Celestian Burst Grenade used to be on the reworked White Dwarf version of the Admiral's War Scroll. At the beginning of the game, he could choose which extra quote unquote artifact he was bringing, and this was one of them, which is a once per battle 2-up turning off ward saves in shooting phase for one unit that's within 12 inches of him. I think this is the auto go-to here if you're not doing spell in a bottle, because if you need to kill some really tanky thing with a great ward save, and remember, a lot of bodyguard rules count as ward saves in per FAQs that we've seen recently. This basically means you're taking out that one target if you put enough work into him, and it's only once per game, but man, is it strong. Now, the thing that's a little nerfed about this is that previously you used to be able to take multiple admirals, and I think you used to be able to stack these, that you could have multiple admirals that all chose the same thing. So you can't do that anymore, but that was probably broken anyway. So pretty great. It's only in shooting, so your melee stuff that's great now is not going to benefit from this, but still pretty strong. Spell in the bottle works the same way as before, except you have to choose an endless spell that's generic, so not one of the faction endless spells, which I think is good. It solves some of the like lore problems, like why am I using Lightning Vortex or the Wildfire Taurus or whatever, or the Comet from Stormcast, which are all popular options. And then the second thing is it now is free. You don't have to pay for the endless spell anymore. So it's just added to your army. And technically, it's added to your army. So if you take a Stormcast wizard, which you can do, or you take an Arcane Tome, you can cast it again. Which obviously it was added to your army previously as well because you paid for it. But this, you'd think maybe they would take that away so that you could only cast it the once. I will say you can't. It's an auto cast and not unbindable. But after that, you don't control it. You just get, if it's predatory, you get control of it after, in the same way that everyone else.
Which is a little bit scary, to be fair.
Yeah, especially if it's the Purple Sun.
Mm-hmm.
This army likes working with the Purple Sun, except now that we're more melee focused. So if you're going for a melee build, you want to be standing next to that Purple Sun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, super strong. And the only other thing, because you only get to cast it once, is a lot of times you wanted to choose something with a high casting value. But the only thing that's got a high casting value of the normal one that's like 8 or higher is the Purple Sun itself. Yep. So yeah, so that's something to consider. Phosphorite Bomblets. The Intern Master has to take this, and the spell in the bottle was Ether Chemist. Once per battle in your shooting phase, target one unit within 6 inches, and you do 1 mortal wound for each 2+ rolled until slain or a 1 is rolled. Meaning, it's kind of like a mini version of the Wargog Prophet spell or ability, the Stare. So basically, you could kill anything as long as you don't roll any ones for a while. I've done the math on this. It works out to an okay amount of mortal wounds on average, but it's still one of these things that can swing real hard, and it could be fun. I think it's more flavorful, or just kind of picking something off right at the end that you've got a few extra wounds you got to do, and they don't have a ward save, and could be good. And remember, it's in your shooting phase, so it can be combined with Celestian Burst Grenade if you take 2 artifacts.
Yeah, this seems like a good second choice, I'd say.
Yeah, if you know that guy's going to get up within 6 inches, you don't have to actually be in combat.
Mm-hmm.
So. And then the last one is basically taking a Knight Incantor from Stormcast. It's a Voidstone Orb for a Navigator that gives him a once per battle auto bind, but not a dispel. Yeah. So it's utility, but I don't think you're really like, I don't think that's your first choice.
Which one do you like the best? Which one do you like the best?
Spell in the Bottle is obviously useful when you have a good reason to take it, especially if you can cast it again. But I think Celestian Burst Grenade's hard to argue.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
same.
All right. So mount traits. The Great Endrin
works. Yeah.
I've split these into one. The Arcanaut Ironclads have 4 choices, and they technically share 2 overlapping choices with frigates, which I'm pretty sure, because they're worded the same, you can't take one on an Ironclad and the same thing again on a. So I've done, and then there's 2 extra ones for frigates, and then 3 for gun haulers. So I've done one slide with the best 4 for ironclads, and then a combo of the remaining 4 for the other 2 vehicles. The last word gives you every enemy charge phase. If an enemy unit has charged you and is within 3 inches, even if you were already in combat, you basically get a free unleash hell, but just for your main gun. The exceptions being, it doesn't matter if you were already in. It's only with your main gun, not all the guns that are on ironclad. And you don't have -1 to hit.
Mm-hmm.
But this is kind of an auto take if you're expecting anyone to ever get close to your boat, which now that we don't teleport is pretty often. And you can do it at the end of the charge phase, not right after they've charged, which means you can wait to see which units charge you.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty strong. Then we've got the Hexen Solutions Old Reliable. This negates the first wound that the ironclad suffers every single phase, which is great. And as we're going to learn about what the engine riggers and engine masters can do now, your boats are really hard to kill, especially if you kind of stack on the defense buffs. And this just makes it almost impossible unless you can kill it in 1 turn. It's basically made it incarnate level difficult to kill, or you could say croak level.
Yeah, I think certain people would undervalue these traits. But I've played with Manfred, who has this built in his into his armor rule, and let me tell you, this is really good.
Yeah.
This is very strong.
There are definitely some more Timmy choices that are going to make you feel like you're doing more work with your boat, but if you need to keep that boat alive, especially if you're kind of Death Starring it, this is a really good option.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, as you mentioned before, you can always build a list where you can take 3 of these traits, right?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, you can only take 1 per ironclad. So
yeah.
You'd have to, and you can't reasonably fit 3 ironclads in the list. And people would probably argue that 2 ironclads is stretching it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so Breath of Morgrim got moved over from a sub faction Great Engine work. It's and it also got boosted. It's in the shooting phase. You have a 9-inch anti-horde mortal wounds thing that happens on 5 pluses per model. So if you choose 1 unit and it's per model in that unit that's within 9 inches, not of your boat. 9 inches is pretty generous, and it's every shooting phase. If you're going up against a particular kind of army, you're doing a good number of wounds here, and it's not even that bad. Because it's not 6s, it's 5s. It's not even that bad against heroes. You know, it's a 1 out of 3 chance of popping that hero that's only got 1 wound off left, which isn't the worst thing in the world. It's just more mortal wounds. So I could see this definitely being an option, especially if your meta involves large. And KO sometimes has a hard time removing large blocks of units, getting rid of lots of wounds. They're better at sniping things.
Yeah, this is good. Yeah. Combine that with the artifact that removes sword saves, and you're going to make Phoenix Guard cry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, especially if they take a big block.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Zombar Corp Dealbreaker Battle Ram is basically what I was alluding to earlier. It's the Ogre-style impact hits. It's on a 4-up based off of your modified charge roll. So if you use that once per game 18-inch, 3d6 charge roll, which averages to 10.5, so you're getting on average 5 mortal wounds off of the charge for that. And keep in mind the frigates have an impact hits charge built in on their war scroll now. So if you have an ironclad that's doing this plus 2 frigates.
And then a hero with a Tusk Helm from the GHB.
Which we have to figure out if that hero, if he's in the boat, gets to use it or not. It's not clear. But if let's say he's on a balloon, and then he's got 12-inch movement, he does it on his own. Then yeah, you can actually stack some serious mortal wounds and wipe out your screens, and then use your 3-inch follow-up pile-in charge afterwards to get to what you really want to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite here?
Oh, sorry. Let me quickly go back. Well, the All Reliable is very good. I like the idea of a big boat that is nigh impossible to kill. But if I were to go for the most tactical choice, I would probably go for the Breath of Morgrim.
Yeah.
Just because most armies need to roll dice and cast spells for this ability to happen.
Sure, fair. Yeah, and you're getting one of these for free anyway, so
Yep.
it's not a bad option.
Okay.
On the next slide, we've got we start with one that we can actually still use on an ironclad, which is plus 2 inches to the movement characteristic, but it's also for the frigate. Pretty great,
Yeah,
right?
good.
I mean, like, you're not complaining. And like I said, if you're using that article that gives you plus 2 inches for all boats, then you're getting plus 4. The ironclad puts him up to 14-inch movement if he's not bracketed. And the frigate puts him up to 16-inch movement if you're doing both of those buffs, or 2 inches less for otherwise. So still pretty good. It's a little boring, but if you're worried about your movement, it helps. And remember that ability that what was it, Fleet Master, that enemy movement phase movement that you could do is a normal move. Use your. So if you're already buffing it, you're getting up to maybe 14, 16 inches with some of these boats, which is pretty great.
Yeah, you're covering a lot of grounds. If you're stacking everything, that's crazy.
Yeah, and there's even more ways to go faster, which we'll cover. So Malefic Sky Mines is for frigate only. It's a once per battle, start of the combat phase, mortal wounds versus a flying unit. I believe on a 2 or 3 it's D3 mortal wounds, and a 4, 5, or 6 is D6. And it's within 6 inches, so you don't actually have to be in combat. So it can be yet another way to just stack on mortal wounds. And you could be doing that after all the impact hits too. So before combat even starts, which is pretty great. Then for the two I chose for the gun hauler, Coalbeard's Collapsible Compartments. This is a fun one because it turns your gun hauler into a 6 model transport vehicle. It used to be 5 models. Now the gun haulers can teleport just like any of the other boats can now, but they used to be able to do it no matter how, and for free on their war scroll. So I would say that it's a little less, but if you just need to put like 2 units of the balloon guys in here, which would be 6 models, or a reinforced unit, or put, I don't know, but 1 Thunderer's unit, a model unit plus 1 hero model. It's pretty good. It's pretty flexible. So if you just need to squeeze in some extra transport capability, you ran out of room in your big boats, this could be a way to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And then the last one is a once per battle impact hit on a D6 roll.
More impact hits.
Yeah, it's equivalent to what you roll on that D6 as long as it's a 2 or higher. So if it's a 6, it's 6, which is great. So you know automatically how many wounds you did. You don't have to roll 10. So it's removing an extra roll in effect. But the caveat is it's the first time this unit does a charge. So you don't get to do it you don't get to choose when you do it.
That's a bummer.
Yeah. So it's a little bit less, but if you're just trying to max out your impact, it's not a bad way to go.
Yeah. A lot of good choices here in both of these lists, to be honest.
I actually think the mount traits are better than the artifacts.
I was gonna say, yeah, because usually mount traits are pretty boring.
Yeah, and considering your whole army revolves around how successful your boats get around, with, I guess, an exception if you want to make an all balloons list that buys 12 per model anyway, then this is not a bad way to go.
Yeah. So I would definitely not leave the house without magnificent omniscope. And that's me being against boring static rules, but this one is just good, very good.
All right, let's move on.
War scroll time. Now I am very curious to see what you've got planned for us here.
Yeah, there's a lot of good war scrolls in the book, but I thought we would focus on these guys. I think the biggest glow up in the army, unquestionably, is the frigate. Because of what it enables with the next biggest glow up, which would be Sky Wardens and Engine Rigger. I love this combo so much, and I'm so excited to play with it. My first list is totally built around this. Also, the Arcanaut Admiral is kind of so good now. Like, you could argue with the update he had in the White Dwarf that he was really solid, but he's gotten to the point where I feel like you kind of want 1 per every boat if you can afford it. Ooh. The Ironclad is still a great centerpiece. Thunderers got tankier and do their job. And Brock Grungson is kind of my wild card here because he really buffs a Baraknar army that wants to be in melee. and wants to be super mobile. So we'll get to all those in a second. So moving on to the individual war scrolls themselves, we've got the frigate. The frigate's gone up to 300 points, used to be 240. The big two abilities that it's got going for it now, the assault boat is the main thing we're talking about here. Not only does it have a bracketable amount of impact hits, it starts with 8 dice that you roll, and for each 4 up, it does a mortal wound. This is in addition to whatever else you're doing with your impact hit kind of stuff that's going on in the army. But, and this is crazy, Jonas, have you read this rule?
No.
Everything that's in your boat, it can hold 12 things now. It used to be the amount that boats could hold was different, but they've cleaned it up and just everyone goes in it. The balloons too, they don't fly along. And it's got a better capacity. It can't get over encumbered, so it's just 12 or whatever you like. Everything that's inside the boat after a charge counts as having charged. And remember, in Barrack Zone, if you get a charge roll off with your Skyfarers units, they're getting +1 to hit, +1 to wound. All those units get to disembark immediately, and as long as they can land within 3 inches of the boat and wholly within 3 inches of the boat, and obviously at least one model touching 3 inches within the target unit.
Yeah.
And they get to all strike first.
No way. Jesus.
Now, keep in mind, you can only put max 12 Skyfarers in this boat, and you probably want to leave some of those slots for some heroes who are not bad in combat either, some of them. Mm-hmm. But all the Skyfarers, or Sky Wardens, have a 2-inch weapon with their good melee build. If you build them 2-inch range, which means even if you have, you're going to have to do a pile-in, and you maybe not all armor within range after immediately disembarking, they're going to be in range with their 32 millimeter bases with their 2-inch reach. And we'll talk about Sky Wardens more, but they're going to be hitting on 2s and 2s at, I believe, what is it, -1? And then 2? Yeah, 2 damage. Mm-hmm. And which is fantastic considering they each have 3 attacks. Now, if you put them with Brock, which we'll talk about later, he's going to be buffing their attacks, but they won't be in Barrack Zone, so they won't be getting the +1 to hit, +1 to wound. But the fact that they all get to strike first, and remember, because they've disembarked, they now count on objectives as bodies. So this kind of solves the whole disembarking problem that we have for taking objectives. This is easily the best thing that's happened to combat for KO ever.
Yeah, very cool.
You're taking those frigates, you're charging in, you want to make sure they get that charge off. We can give them with other units, run and charge and run and shoot with a command ability. And they're just getting in, doing the mortal wounds. You're dropping all of your heavy hitters out. They're all striking. You're basically Ideneth every single turn that you can line this up.
Yeah.
Now, the problem is, you can't get back in the boat if you're within combat. So you have to clear out, if you want to do it again the next turn, you have to clear out all of your opponent, all of the units that are within you, and within 3 inches of your range that are putting you in combat. And you're hoping that they don't bring some other unit with, because you're not going to get that charge bonus, not going to be able to get in the boat on the next turn, and you're not going to be striking first. Yeah. But if you get that double turn, the crazy thing is KO used to be great on a double turn because they're just going to shoot you twice. But now they're great on the double turn because they might get to do, because they just jump back in the boat, fly another. Let's say that you got them up to 14-inch movement on the boats. And by the way, the frigates don't degrade in movement anymore. They have a 3-up save instead of a 4-up save, and they're up to 15 wounds now instead of 14. They don't heal every one of your hero phases 1 wound, but there's ways to get around that. And they're just way more reliable now, and they count as 5 models on an objective. So, like I said, it's down below. It solves the melee deficiency problems, and it mobilizes your army. It's basically a delivery mechanism for all of your hard hitters. And for getting on objectives, even if you don't want to hit hard. If you got a unit of 10 Arco, you drop them out, now they're on the boat. Now they have to survive that combat phase, and they're not good in combat. But if you can make it work, you're at least getting those bodies on that objective. Yeah. The one thing I didn't talk about is bomb racks, and this is what all the boats have now. if you run or do a normal move over any unit, then you get to roll your bomb racks. And the bomb racks are another mortal wound. They used to be at the start of the hero phase, or start of the combat phase, you rolled a d6. You might have a modifier depending on how big your boat was and how wounded it was, but essentially on a 4-up, you did d3 mortal wound. Now it's been changed to, for a frigate, well, for a gun hauler, if you fly over someone, 4 dice, and on a 4-up, it's a mortal wound, so on average 2. On a frigate, if it's not wounded, it's 8, so 8 dice, so you're doing 4, which is equivalent to the ramming. And then on an ironclad, it's 10, so it's doing 5 mortal wounds. So just by flying over something, even if you don't want to engage in combat, you just tag them a little bit, fly back so they're outside of 3 inches, shoot, do all your crazy shooting, and then you got the bomb racks in addition.
Yeah.
It's pretty strong.
Is it,
so
how is this rule worked? Is it once per movement phase?
It is after this unit finishes a normal move or a run.
So with the command trait that you get to do 2 normal move, well, a more normal move in the shooting phase of in the movement phase of the enemy.
Yes. So keep in mind you had to have been outside of 12 inches. So if you're only moving 12, which is
of course, yeah, you can't fly over him, yeah.
If you did buff it up to 16, it would technically be possible.
Yeah, difficult, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. They would because they still have to fly over and come back outside of 3.
Yeah,
because they can. Yeah. So, but if you just buff them once, they can't do it. But yeah, super strong. Frigates are the new. If you don't, and the great thing is the Vanguard box comes with a frigate, which used to be kind of like, man, why do I want a frigate? Does this change your mind of Bark Zilfin a little bit? I mean, getting an extra engine work and frigates or battle line, which are protecting those GCs.
That mainly still is the biggest plus in my eyes. I like the rules and how good they are now, but I feel like they're still best with the Barak Zon guys, right? The Sky Wardens.
Yeah, if you're trying to do the charge thing.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not every single time. And Barak Nar is a good argument too, but we'll see why with Brock.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the Sky Wardens so we can see why they're in such a good combo together. I've kind of cheated and put engine riggers on here too because they're also good in combat. They're not as good, but they're solid. Sky Wardens cost more at 130. They went up a lot by 30 points because their value is definitely improved. And engine riggers are 120, which is up a little bit, I think. I think they were 110 recently. The big ability for Sky Wardens is time charges, and this is apart from their melee profile. I'll talk about that in a second. But their time charges is after every combat phase, not your combat phase, but every combat phase, they can choose to retreat, and if they roll a 2-up, they don't choose to retreat. They choose to try to do this ability. If they roll a 2-up, they get to they have to retreat, and they do D3 mortal wounds to the unit they're retreating on. This used to be limited a little bit by flying units, I believe. I think there was also a rule that was limited. Oh yeah, disengaging used to be limited by flying too, but that's no longer a problem. You can disengage from a unit even if you're flying. This is particularly good because, especially for grabbing an objective. Let's say you charge somewhere. You get them in combat, they fight. At the end of that combat phase, now they have to survive it. They get to basically, on a 2-up, do an auto retreat at 12-inch movement, go fly somewhere, and then do mortal wounds on the way out, which is kind of like adding insult to injury. You could also have them retreat in such a way that they're outside of 3 inches of the boat they came in to charge in on, so they're no longer inside combat with a unit. And let's say that boat, they had removed models in such a way that the boat was already outside of 3, which would set you up for doing the charge thing next turn again. Because they'll just fly to the other side of the boat to be out of combat and jump back in, which is pretty great. The engine riggers, which are the Healy version of the guys, the balloon kit, they have field repairs, which they always had, which basically let them heal a nearby sky vessel. But now it's basically gotten better. A unit of 3 guys is healing on average 2 wounds per turn, and it gets better if they're around one of the types of engine masters that buffs them up, that puts it up to 3 wounds per turn. which is pretty good. And that's every turn. It used to be only in your hero phase. It's now literally every single turn at the end of any phase you like, which is great because you can wait till they've just finished their shooting phase and heal up before you have to go into the combat phase with that boat, which is super good. The Injured Master's ability to heal is still stuck in your own hero phase. This happens all the time. Both of these units have an ability that if you take the grapnel launcher, which I'm talking about here at the why pick this unit, they both have this super mobile ability, once per game ability. I'm calling it the Batman grapnel. This is the wording on this. While this unit includes any models included with the grapnel launcher, once per battle at the end of your movement phase, you can say this unit will reel itself towards an object. If you do so, pick a point on the battlefield within 15 inches of this unit and on a terrain feature. Then remove this unit from the battlefield, set it up again wholly within 3 inches of that point and more than 9 inches from all enemy units.
Jeez.
So that unit, it's amazing. You can go grab an objective. Remember, objectives can't be. You can't put a terrain piece within 3 inches of an objective if someone's setting up the battlefield appropriately. So, and your unit has to be wholly within 3 inches of that point. But it can definitely, and that's the center of the objective. But there's still 3 inches of that radius that counts, that you could be on. So this can pull you onto an objective. It can get out of a sticky situation. It can go put you next to a boat that you need to be next to heal, and then do your healing after you've done this movement thing. And it's pretty strong. And it also a treat. It doesn't say anything about whether you're in combat or not. Granted, you have to give up, in order to take this weapon, you have to give up one of your better weapons, which is armor.
What do you have to give up? Because you dropped off there for a sec.
You have to give up one of your melee weapons.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Because you basically are choosing between 12 or 15-inch range better guns, whose range got reduced and their output got reduced. So I don't think you actually want to build that build in order to take the default setting, which is the really good melee profile. And I'll just really quickly nail that. For the engine riggers, the melee profile is 1-inch range, 2 attacks, 3s, -2 rend, D3 damage. And for the Sky Wardens, it's 2-inch range, 3 attacks, 3s, -1 rend, flat 2 damage, not variable. Both are great. Technically, the Sky Wardens come out on top in every situation, but still, no one's crapping on a 2 attacks, 3s, -2 rend, D3 damage profile.
Yeah.
So pretty good, and these units are really flexible. I could talk about their shooting gun, their missile profiles, but I don't think I'm talking about, except to say that their base missile profile is also not bad. The Engine Rigger's base missile profile is 12-inch range, 3 attacks, 3s and 4s, -2 rend, 1 damage. So with a unit, you're getting 9 attacks, 3s and 4s, -2. And then for the Sky Wardens, it's similar. It's 3 attacks, 3s and 3s, -1, 1. So a little worse with their base weapon. But still, you're not complaining about that with how good these units are in combat, especially considering what they can do with healing, the movement shenanigans they can do, and how they work so well inside boats. Yeah. Just really great.
Very cool. Okay.
All right.
Geez, what a unit! Love it. Next one, the Admiral, where you wanna put one in each and every boat.
I would say it's a temptation, whereas before maybe a little less so, especially before the White Dwarf update. They got a little cheaper from 140 points down to 125. Like I've mentioned a couple times before, each one gets to choose one of your ironclads or frigates as their flagship, and every turn they get to issue a free command point or command ability to that sky vessel. Pretty cool, especially in an army that's hungry for CP. So that's giving you an extra one every turn in principle anyway. They also have a once per battle ability that gives 1 Skyfarer unit plus 1 rend. So that's going in I'm pretty sure this is in the shooting phase only. Let me look. Yeah, it's for the shooting phase. So this would be best on Thunderers. You're bumping them up to often a -2 rend on all those shooting attacks, which helps get through some of the consistency problems that KOs often suffered from. It's only once per battle, but you can take multiple. Keep doing it. Each admiral can trade off who's doing it. Mm-hmm. And you can't stack it. but so you can't have 2 admirals put it on 1 unit. And we have another way of getting +1 rend with a fumigator. The etheric, what am I trying to say? The ether chemist, his fumigator ability that does it for every single turn. He gets to do it for a disembarked unit. So I believe that can stack. You can do the admiral's ability plus the ether chemist can do it because they're different abilities, and bump those guys up to for 2 extra rend. If you got the purple sun, you're getting so pretty strong. It doesn't apply to the boats though. And then lastly, he's got a command ability that lets one boat run and shoot and charge, which, as I've mentioned a number of times, is super crucial to getting off some of your great stuff in this army and getting your flexibility back. Granted, it's in the movement phase, so you can't stack it with an auto charge, and you're not going to be doing it with your fly high and all that stuff either, unless you have that one-time ability that lets one boat receive 2 commands.
Yeah.
So he's a dedicated babysitter for each ship. He's a modular buff piece for the army, and he's not bad in combat either. 3 attacks, 3s, 2s, -2, 3, and his gun is the same profile but with -1 rend and 2 damage. So not bad. He did lose a bodyguard rule that kept him alive for a lot longer, but he's going to be sitting in a boat for a large chunk of the time, which he always was doing anyway, but that's giving him +1 save by default and -1 to hit. So...
And his model is one of the best models in the range.
Oh yeah, you think so?
Oh wow, he's so. I almost instantly bought him when he was released for my D&D campaign, just because it just gets my creative juices flowing. Right? I don't know what to say.
Yeah. My army's kind of bumblebee colored, so I've gotten each of those layers on that skirt thing he's got to either black or yellow. And
oh yeah.
Yeah, I like the guy.
Very cool.
All right, so I think we got the Ironclad next. The Ironclad does a lot of the same stuff that the frigate does in terms of being a boat. It carries 22 people instead of 12, so 10 extra dudes, which is enough to put a big unit of, 20 people of Arco in there, Arcanaut Company. Another thing that's worth pointing out about this rule is they used to make it over encumbered if you went over a limit that was really an unfortunate cut point, where if you did it, you had to choose between either putting full units in there and no heroes, or taking like an MSU of a unit and then like a hero. Now they've made it nice round numbers that let you take a good number of different combos of things you might want to do, plus at least 1 or 2 heroes in the boat as well, which is great because these boats really want to host heroes. It also has access to the best great engine works, as we've seen. It also has the bomb racks that we talked about, but it does more bomb racks than the frigate does. And its weapons, it's got better shooting profile than any of the other, a better shooting, because you get to choose between 3 different main guns instead of usually 2 choices, 1 or 2 or 3 choices. It's also got its close range shots are way better and than a lot of the other boats. It's 12-inch range, 8 attacks at 3s, -1/2, and then you're also getting a 24-inch range shot that auto comes with the boat. It was 4 attacks, 4s, 3s, -1 D3, and then a weapon that's going to double down on some of that stuff. It's bumped up 2 extra wounds to 20 wounds and has a 3-up save as it always did, so it's still tanky. It lost its ability to heal, but there's other ways to get around that. And it counts as 5 models on objectives, as I mentioned before, with a once per battle extra mortal wounds thing that's the same as the impact hits from the gun hauler, where you roll a d6 on a 2-up, it does that amount of mortal wounds against, but it's once per battle. In general, like I said, it's a good combo of tanky versus shooty. It's a Death Star centerpiece for when you need more than the frigate's 12 model capacity, and maybe especially if you're not too worried about having that charge bonus. It's not good in combat, like none of the boats are good in combat, but it is going to put out a good bit of damage, especially if you've got a purple sun with it to maximize what the shooting attacks are doing. And it hosts just enough guys inside that you can do crazy stuff. Like I said, you can put a bunch of the engine riggers that heal inside and the engine masters that support them and also heal. And they're doing the engine riggers, the guys in blue, turn at a given point that you choose, and you can basically keep the thing alive. Like you said, that one great engine that ignores the first wound every turn, or every phase, that's big. And you can put a gun hauler next to it to give it a 6-up ward. So you're putting this thing at a really high healing rate that's almost impossible to kill unless you take it down in one go. Granted, you don't have access to wizards that can fly along with it, generally speaking, unless you give a guy an arcane to put Mystic Shield on it, which would be obviously even better. But it's a tanky fortress, and it's going to probably stay alive for quite a while unless they put a lot of work into it.
500 points is quite a lot, though.
It is a lot, but it was 490 before. It only went up 10, and it's definitely gotten more utility. I mean, it doesn't teleport the way it used to. But if you're trying to make a Death Star build where you only teleport per turn, this isn't a bad way to go. And support it with some combat dudes. And remember, any guys that are in the boat count as being. They don't have to step out of the boat to fight. They all get to fight. They're just not going to get strike first. So if you put all of your melee dudes in this, it's just a walking, I guess like battle dome. That's just kind of, it brings everything with it. So you're putting like 18 of those balloon boys in there. If you want to go super Death Star, they're not fighting first, but they're gonna all fight, and it's gonna be pretty rough.
Yep, it's gonna look epic at least.
Yeah,
or hurt a lot when you have to roll for every single one of them to when the boat dies.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too. There is one great engine work that makes it so that the guys in the boat don't die. So
no, well,
yeah.
I mean, probably not worth it though.
No, you want to be stepping out anyway in general.
Yeah,
or not getting that close to die.
Okay, Thunderers, one of the coolest units.
They used to have a weird place in the army because they had a 4-up save just like the Arco. They had a weird combination of ranges that just didn't really work that well, and they wanted to be in combat, but not because they're good in combat, because they shoot better when they're in combat. But in order to use that ability, you have to have been previous turn, and then you get your shooting phase, or you have to intentionally charge after you didn't get the good shots off, get into combat, survive that phase, hope that you get the next turn, a double turn, and then you get to finally use your good shooting. Fortunately, they've streamlined all of that. There are so many less combinations of what goes on with this unit now, and you're pretty much encouraged to just use instead of maybe just choosing for the rifle. All of your ranges are either 18 inches or 12 inches, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check that that's accurate. 12 or 18 instead of what it was before, which is a mishmash of different things. You've got a bunch of different guns, but the short version of this is it's your best damage dealer per point in terms of shooting profiles in the army. And it has an ability called Suppressing Fire that if you've shot with every single model at that unit, targeted the same enemy unit, meaning the unit's going to have to implicitly be within 12 inches because if some of your 12-inch dudes can't shoot anything, it doesn't say everyone that has shot has to shoot at the same unit. It says everyone has to have shot. Then you roll 2d6. You add the number of wounds caused by those attacks that were allocated to that enemy unit and not negated. If this score, so 2d6 plus the amount of wounds you caused, exceeds the unit's bravery characteristic, it is suppressed in the start of your next hero phase. Subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by that unit while it's suppressed. And it can't be suppressed more than once in a turn or in that time period. So and they got +1 to save. So there are two wounds apiece, 3 plus save. And like I said, they're a really good target for getting extra rend to. 2 of the weapon profiles have no rend. 1 of the profiles has -1, and another one has -2. So you could be bumping them up with either chemist to +1 on all those profiles, which is pretty great. Or +2 if you double stack that with the admirals at once per game ability, or Purple Sun around. So they can be doing quite a bit of stuff. I think they come out to an average unit of 5 has about 18 some attacks when you account for how their different weapons work. And if they do get into combat, one of the guns does on a 2-up D3 mortal wounds just at the end of the combat phase, and then another this bird that comes with it called a drill bill does.
That's on the model right now.
Yeah, it does. On a 5-up, it does 1 extra mortal wound. So you've got a couple extra ways to do a little bit of mortal wounds in combat, but their melee profiles 1 attack, 4s and 4s, no rend 1. So it's nothing to speak of. But they definitely, with the +1 save and then improving taking away the complexity of when they're at their best, they've definitely gotten a glow up, except for in that really rare situation actually survive long enough to be amazing. So they don't need to be outside the boat anymore to get those buffs. They do if you want to get the Ether Chemist buff, but if you're not doing that, they're still great in boats. You load up an Ironclad or frigate with 15 or 10 of these guys, and it's just adding to the amount of sheer shots that you're getting out of that boat. So I still think this unit's pretty good, even though I think the big glow up in the army is the blue. What do you think?
Just mainly, I love the look of these guys. For me, these guys make sense, and I'm not going to shit on the metal balloons thing because it's Age of Sigmar and doesn't have to be realistic. But these guys look menacing as hell, while the other ones just look a little bit weird to me personally. So I'm a big fan of Thunderers just for their aesthetic. I played against this unit specifically in one of the boats. It was quite good, actually. A little bit unreliable at times, but as you mentioned, that has been reduced a little bit by the Admiral being there as well. Or you can at least bring an Admiral to buff their shooting. So yeah, I think you want big units of these guys in boats. If I would play it, it would be that way.
Yeah, I really wish they'd given the ability to let that amendment that lets a unit count as 2 bodies on an objective. I wish these guys would have counted. That it wouldn't have been that much of a stretch, and they're the closest thing you have to Arco for being objective holders. But they're the more elite version of it since they're on 2 wounds apiece and 3 up save. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with what they did with them.
Yeah. Okay. The last
one.
Last
one. Brock. Brock used to be
the guy with guns in his beard.
Yeah, and his mustache. You used to never see this guy, and they kept dropping his points. He didn't get to do any of the good things. Oh, his weapon profiles have always been solid. He had a good melee situation. But he's key locked to Barak Nar, which, as I've said before, isn't a great sub-faction, or wasn't before. And he just really wasn't bringing what you wanted him to do as a kind of fake version of an Injured Master and Dirigible, point for point better. But they've changed this. He's also a War Master now, but strangely is only a War Master in Barak Nar, which is kind of a bummer. Kind of almost a waste of a War Master ability. But in addition to doing some amount of mortal, his big 2 things that he does is that he has command the fleet, which is 3 times version of the Arcanaut Admiral's ability to make units run and shoot and charge.
Yeah.
So he can issue it to 3 sky vessels, which means if you had an Admiral and you did this, they're named different things. You could make both of them happen to different boats. So if you had 4 boats that you needed to do it to, you could take 1 Admiral and do it. And this works outside of Barak Nar. So if you really need to get those charges off, or get those boats close enough to run and shoot, it's pretty invaluable, because remember, you can't issue the same command twice. So even if you have 2 admirals, you're only getting to 1 boat. But this guy enables you to do it with your whole fleet, most likely, except for maybe an extra gun hauler, which in and of itself is pretty good. And he's good in combat. The first rule, let's see what the official wording is on that. It's all one of these flavorful names. It's the first rule of Grungson, his name. If he makes a charge move in the same turn, you add 1 to the characteristic of melee weapons friendly Barak Nar only Skyfarer units while they're wholly within 12
inches.
That's
a bummer.
Yeah, and so he's stuck in Barak Nar, which is why I said Barak Nar gets a little buffed by having access to him. So I've done the math on both Engine Riggers and Sky Wardens getting to do the charge just by themselves, and then with this buff, and then with Barak Zone, and that's the order in which they're good. So getting the +1 attack that he gives them is good, but it's not quite as good as Barak Zone. But if you really, it's not a bad option, especially considering the utility he's giving you and letting you do the 3 times run and shoot and charge. And they don't have to have charged that turn in order to do it. So what you could do is have them charge. They're not
Yeah.
going to get any buffs. But then the previous turn, maybe he couldn't catch up with them. Next turn, he does it, and he turns the effect on. So as long as he's within that 12-inch bubble, or they're within his 12-inch bubble, it's going to go off. And like I said down below, it enables extreme ship mobility, even outside of Barknar, and then he's a strong melee centerpiece in general. And his shooting profiles aren't bad. So I'm a big fan of how they upgraded the guy. I kind of think he's a little overpriced at 220.
Yeah.
But if they bring his price down, maybe 200, 180,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think we're really talking about a temptation to play in Barknar or even to use him outside. He's pretty solid. He's not a GC though, but pretty solid. And somehow that big ass boat thing he's got fits inside a boat, which doesn't seem to have enough room anyway.
Yeah.
But I'm a pretty big.
Let me ask you the most important question, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Would you ever wear that kind of top hat or no?
I'm not that steampunky, but I think the rest of his getup is pretty cool. I like that he's basically in a dreadnought.
Let me rephrase that. Would your neck be able to support the kind of top hat?
Yeah, I don't know how strong those Dwarden necks. I think are pretty
God
tough.
damn.
Yeah. So yeah, pretty big fan of this guy. And it's worth pointing out that there are tons of other great units that they've brought into this army. The Navigator can give some amazing shenanigans and put out more mortal wounds. The Chemist we've already talked about. The Code Right lets you mess around with your footnotes and amendments.
Do you like him? The Code Right, the new model?
I definitely like him. I'm just finding a hard time putting him in lists, especially if you're in Barknar. You don't need the extra CPs he's giving you. Mm-hmm. And I don't think swapping out your footnotes and amendments is as strong as it could have been if some of them had been better. One of those amendments is kind of worthless anyway, the reroll ones.
Yeah.
And you have to permanently switch the other one. The idea with the footnotes is since they're once per battle, you use it and then you swap to a new one and you use it. So that's where you're getting most of your utility out of it. But the extra CPs, are always welcome. And there's other things in the army that are great, but we don't have time to talk about every unit. But I really feel like they've done a good job of diversifying what things do. The ships all do different things now, which they didn't before. They were just like mini versions of each other. Even the Sky Wardens and Engine Riggers feel more diversified now. And everything feels like it's better in its own role than it previously was. Mm. So there's a lot more internal balance going on in the book.
Okay. List time. Now let's just agree for time's sake because you almost have to go. Let's not go over every individual piece, but let just tell us what the point of your list is, or what the idea of the list is specifically. Oh, right, we have the important changes first. I think we kind of talked about everything here, right?
Yeah, that was kind of the reason I was saying what I was just saying too.
Right.
And I've hit most of the big things here, so I feel okay with it. It's basically just internal balance kind of stuff, which hits on some later points as well.
Yeah. Okay. So list time.
Sure, and I don't have to go right away, but I've got 40 minutes, but we don't have to push.
Oh, okay, you don't have to be there at.
No, he's coming to me.
Okay, that is. Okay, that changes things. I was like, oh god, we have like 10 minutes.
No. For those listening, I'm practicing with my net list, tech list, Sentinels list.
Oh, yeah.
Get ready for that. So I've got a friend coming over to test it.
Okay.
All right, so let the zone shine, and which is a little bit Beatles referencey, I guess. So sub-faction, Barak Zone, of course. Grand strategy, the day is ours. Jonas, you might be really happy to see that I picked this, because you were saying in our GHB review that this is one of your favorite grand strategies. This is the GC one.
Yep.
With having more. I have 6 GCs in this list, and being that they're mostly in a boat, with +1 to save, -1 to hit, and are often going to be around battle line, and I feel like it's pretty easy to keep more than your opponent. So I felt like this is the time to do it if they're Triumph, Bloodthirsty, because I want reroll charges. Article, Master the Skies for the +2 extra inch movement characteristic for my boats. Amendment, prosecute wars is the 2d6 run roll once per turn. And footnote, there's no reward. This is the, if I'm not mistaken, the 3d6 charge one.
Yeah.
So you can see I'm super movement focused on this list. I'm trying to maximize the chance that my 2 frigates are going to deliver the payload of all of my Sky Wardens. So we've got an Admiral as my general with Cunning Fleet Master for yet more movement shenanigans. That's the outside of 12-inch normal move at the end of the enemy movement phase. Celestium Burst Grenade for the once per game no ward saves can be made in the shooting phase. His flagship is the frigate with the Great Engine Work and not the other one. And he's got Leadership at the Alpha, which I think is kind of a go-to in KO. 3 of the same command. Unfortunately, I can't use my my movement shenanigans commands, but this is your all-out attack, all-out defense, redeploy. I don't remember if Rally's in there or not, but definitely those first 3, which for a +1 to hit for a bunch of things is not bad. I've got another Admiral to go in the other frigate, that's his flagship, and that's what his thing is. One other thing I didn't mention about the Admiral earlier is if your boat remains stationary, it doesn't move at all, doesn't fly high, the Admiral can do a command ability that gives it +1 attack on all shooting profiles, which might sound big, but a lot of the boats have like 8 shots on a particular weapon, so you're only improving it by 12.5%. Or if it's got 6, then 17%, blah, blah, blah. Which can be some amount of extra firepower, but it feels a little underwhelming. If it was doing it to a unit that only had 1 shot, then you'd be doubling their. But anyway, you could use that, but this list is trying to get in combat. I've got 2 engine masters with engine harnesses, foot, not the one in the balloons. These guys heal 3 wounds at the start of your hero phase to each of their boats. So I like to put one of these guys in the boat. The boats don't auto heal anymore, and I didn't bring any. So these guys are just healing those boats each turn. Remember, a frigate has 15 wounds on a 3-up save. And they also have another ability that before you do that heal, on a 2-up, he gets to make it so that your boat fights on its top bracket no matter how many wounds it suffered for that turn, not for the falling hero, not to your falling hero phase, but for that turn, which means that you're getting max amount of impact hits and bombs and your attacks for your combat, but in the boat itself. But the boat itself's not good. So that's kind of cool. If you roll a 1 on that, though, you suffer some mortal wounds. So it's a little bit of risk. But if you're pretty wounded, and this works for the Ironclad too, not that I have one in this list, but that one does get bracketed in terms of movement, and I could see that being really important for making most of your move that following turn. Then I've got the code right. I did manage to put one in this list because he's giving me the extra CPs, and he's going to let me mess around with that footnote. So with there's no reward, I'm probably using it to get that 3d6 charge, and then after I've blown that, I use if I roll, you have to roll for it, but you can roll to get that footnote replaced, and then if you do that, you're choosing for the one that gives you maybe return fire, but probably without our ships we're not, which gives you 2. A boat gets you two command abilities in 1 turn. And then I've got an Etheric Navigator who I haven't talked about. He definitely got to glow up. What happens is at the start of your hero phase or in your hero phase, you roll 6 dice on you see how many 1s and how many 6s you got. And there is a command trait that lets you re-roll any of these to make it more likely. And you choose. Do you want to go with the number of 1s you rolled or the number of 6s? For the number of 1s you rolled, you get to do mortal wounds against separate D3 mortal wounds against that many different enemy targets that are within 30 inches. So you can be dishing out some mortal wounds. Granted, you're only rolling 6 dice, so the number of 1s you get or the number of 6s you get isn't going to be particularly high unless you can re-roll them. But it's something to do. And in addition, any mortal wounds caused by this that are allocated, not negated, have that unit's movement characteristic in the start of your next hero phase. So that's kind of what he used to do. And if you choose to go the 6s route, then you get to pick one different sky vessel for each 6 you rolled that's within 30 inches of the unit and visible. And that sky vessel, this is in your hero phase, can make a normal move of D3 plus 3 inches, which is not a lot, but can be enough to make sure you don't trigger a redeploy, can be enough to kind of get you just a little further down the street that you need to be. And like I mentioned about the Arcanaut Admiral's ability to allow a stationary boat to fire, this is stationary in the movement phase. So if you only need just this D3 plus 3 inch movement to bring you within range of your shooting, it doesn't count as having moved, and then you get to double, or you get to add 1 attack to each of your shooting profiles, which is kind of cool. And this guy can also attempt to dispel 1 endless spell and unbind one spell. So he's got a lot of functionality for tossing him into a list where you've got 6 heroes, but I'm not tossing him to every one of my lists. I think he's kind of... and then the bulk of the list, the heart here, is 2 units of 6 Sky Wardens with Sky Pikes, so the melee version. That's 1 per boat, and then 1 unit of 3 per boat. So you got 9 per boat. I split them up so that they can fight separately and move around and go objectives or whatever. And they're just doing all the stuff we already talked about. By the way, I was telling Jonas before we went live with this, or started recording, that if you do the output, the expected output per point or per 100 points for this unit, Sky Wardens outperform Fulminators per point by a good margin. I think it's like by 50% more, which is insane. If they've got this buff, the Barg's own buff, and they get the charge off, which is of course also when the Fulminators do. Granted, the Fulminators have 6 wounds apiece and have a 3-up save. These guys have 2 wounds apiece and a 4-up save. But they get to strike first if that frigate made that charge roll and you disembark them. And then, of course, they get to retreat and get out of combat if they need. And then, as you see here, my great engine work for the frigate was Malefic Sky Mines, which is the once per game against a flying unit mortal wounds thing you can do. So 1,985 points, 40 bodies, 100 wounds, not bad, 26 models. So low on objective holding, but higher than it used to be because those boats used to only count for 2 bodies on objective. 2 battle regiments, so we're a 2-drop. I've got full 6 Galician champs, as we already mentioned. Jonas, what do you think of this list?
Well, most of it kind of writes itself if you've listened to your enthusiasm when it comes to certain units and certain abilities. I think I'm a little bit surprised by how many Galician champs fit into a list and you still having enough points left over to build an actual working list.
Yeah, there's
a lot in here, right?
Yeah, and they're all on the boats, so they're all protected.
Yeah,
and they're going to be around battle lines, so you're not shooting them.
Yeah, it's very cool. I like it a lot. I think maybe if you're playing against an army that can easily deal with 2 threat pieces on the board, as in they can maneuver around it or screen you long enough, then you might have a harder time. But other than that, it's pretty good. Certain missions will give you quite a tough time, though, right?
Well, once the Sky Wardens step out, even if they separate and they split and go in their own different ways, they still have a 12-inch movement.
Yeah.
So
fair.
and they still get the charge bonus even if they don't get to strike first from the boat.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's looking very good.
You could definitely make a whole list that's just Sky Wardens and a few heroes that fly, and you still have a 12-inch flying army, you know? Like,
yeah, that's fair.
We only get to do the boat teleports, but we only get to do 1 anyway, so it's not a bad thing. And see, here's the thing is if you do rely on your army very quickly becomes a 2 to 3 threats list, you know, because you can only fit so many boats in a list, and you can only fit so many models in those boats. So there's probably a build that's going to be a little bit more spread out here, but those heroes, those extra heroes I take offer a lot of utility for how cheap they are.
Yeah.
So, you know.
It's a super cool idea. It's also very non-KO before the new book. As in, I don't think a lot of KO players that just play competitively have these models.
Yeah, right. I have most of it. I have to get a few more Skywarns, but I bought them before they sold out of my store. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious to see how different your second list is.
Well, I intentionally tried to pick something that's the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah, I
So,
figured. Shall we move on?
yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Thunderstruck.
Thunderstruck. Here's my
Great
naked
song.
dwarf.
Great song.
Yeah. Here's my naked dwarf on the left here, looking at his suit that he's excited to get back into here.
I mean, he's
As
in
you
spandex, right?
Oh yeah. He's that's a sexy dude there. Probably looks a little bit like some of the normal Warhammer guys, especially with the beard.
Sure.
Subfaction Barak Urbaz. To my point earlier, I find the utility of the extra article pretty handy. Grand strategy: take what's theirs. Again, I feel like this is kind of a default, especially with the mobile army, even though it's become less so. The triumph is inspired for the +1 to wound because we don't have that triumph anymore as a either gold usage as we used to. The article 1, honor is everything. This is my 4-up rally because I've got big units of Thunderers here, especially the 15 and 10, of course. Article 2 is settle the grudges for the +1 to wound against one particular target for my whole army. The amendment is prosecute wars. I kind of feel like it's the default amendment, and it's the only one that makes sense in my list because it's the one that gives you once per turn 2d6 run. The other one that's halfway decent is it makes Arco count as double on the objective, but I don't have Arco on this list. And the footnote is without our ships. This is for the ships receiving 2 command abilities, so that you can maybe do the teleport and retreat.
Yeah.
So now we've got a different general. We've got an Engine Master, Engine Harness, same guy as before that I talked about. He's got X Grunstock, which even though I'm in Barak Urbaz, which makes Gun Haulers battle line, is turning on all of my Thunderers as well to be battle line. Mm-hmm. So, and he's getting an extra command ability he can do every turn for free to one of those units of Thunderers. He's also got Leadership of the Alpha as his aspect. Then I've got an Admiral who's tied to an Ironclad. I've only got an Ironclad in this list, and he's once again got a Celestian Burst Grenade for the getting rid of Rend for 1 turn, getting rid of ward saves, which is super good with that big block of all of my shooting that's going to be just focus firing down on someone. We got the Ether Chemist, which, as I mentioned before, can take the spell in the bottle, and I've given him purple. And because it's free, I didn't write it elsewhere on the list because I don't actually have to pay points for it. So I just listed here with my artifact. Of course, the Purple Sun is trying to give me extra Rend, and I'm trying to keep my guys at a distance. The Thunderers fire at 12 inches or 18 inches, and then the boats are largely doing between 12 and 24. So I'm trying to stay as close or as far away as possible these guys because no one in this list to be in combat except maybe the Admiral. But the Ether Chemist likes to step out of the boat because he can give me the +1 Rend to a unit. And that has been FAQ'd that it cannot stack, which it was before the book even came out FAQ'd, before it went on pre-order, I believe. And then he doesn't have a bad shooting profile himself. He's got 3d6 attack, 4s and 4s, -2/1. So you're going to be getting +1 to wound with the if you're shooting at the one unit you really want to be shooting at. But he's got -2 Rend, and he could give himself the extra Rend if he really wanted to. So even if everyone else dies, he can keep giving it to himself as long as they're outside the boat. And he has a -1 to hit roll for all attacks by enemy models while they're within combat as he's outside of the boat. So he's kind of a utility piece with all the things he's bringing there, including the Purple Sun. He's basically a Rend, a debuff monster, I guess, a debuff focal point. Yeah. And then I've got a second Ether Chemist doing the same thing who wants to step out and then give one of them's giving the Rend to the first unit of Thunders and the other one's giving it to the other one. So they want to be outside the boat to hold an objective and then maybe get back in to start moving. So then we've got the Ironclad with the last word so that if they do get charged, it's getting to get that kind of free Unleash Hell off. And then the Frigate, which doesn't have anything special going on for it. Interestingly, I actually used a battalion here that I've never used before. I've got a command entourage to give me to give me the extra artifact, so the spell in the bottle plus the Slash and Burst Grenade. I got Sharpshooters for the Thunderers so that they can target those GCs if I need to, because I've got a large anyway, might as well. And this GC's unit actually is comprised entirely, or Sharpshooters, shooting units, not just some space fillers to make sure the battalion's filled. And then Line Breaker. Do you know what Line Breaker does?
It gives you an extra run or charge.
Line Breaker has to be one commander plus two behemoths that are not leaders, max 3. Once per battle, you get to do an all-out attack or all-out defense without a commander.
Right. Okay.
So that's for my boats,
Mm.
which is interesting because I've got exactly the right amount after doing all the other stuff. So literally every one of my models is a battalion. And so one of my boats is getting an extra free all-out attack or all-out defense, which I'm not complaining about. So it's a totally different list. It's actually got more wounds at 117, more bodies, and more models. It's a 9-drop list, but you're not really trying to get the 1-drop off, which is a good time to mention that KO no longer can hide in the corner and still expect to get to the other side of the table as soon as they want to, because you only got that 1 teleport. So KO is probably going to still try in this type of army where you don't have to get to choose that first turn. You're probably still going to try to hold back a little bit, but maybe not corner whoring it as much as KO is known for doing. What was that reaction? Your reaction to the 9 drops? Is that what you thought was maybe too steep?
No.
Oh, I thought I heard you make a like "woo boy" kind of sound.
Oh no, it was a sound of consent. Like yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ah, okay. So yeah, this list has basically everything different. All of my articles are different. All the code entirely. Everything else on the top line there, it's focused on shooting, with the Thunderers being the tanky guys that they are, especially if they're sitting in the boat, or even with an Aether Chemist at -1 to hit if he's in combat with the unit that's trying to get them. And you've got a lot of different you've got movement shenanigans as much as you would have before with the other list. It's not as built around doing that. So what do you feel about this list in contrast to the first one?
I think this is more up my alley. I don't think it would be as enjoyable to play against, to be fair. But I like this kind of play style where you have some moving pieces, but then even if they crash or if they get destroyed, you still have the big threat from the ranged units. A normal-ish amount of Galician champions, and they're kind of throwaway as well, right? Especially the Aether Chemist with the purple Son of Shaish. He's probably going to die if he pops that spell in a bottle afterwards, right?
I mean, the boat, you don't get the pre-game move or whatever, the first turn free move that you get in the hero phase like we once did. But I mean, it's going to be the same thing. You're just going to try to get up there a bit, let the purple sun out, and then have the rest of your army try to get 18-inch shooting to try to make the most of that purple sun on the first turn before you lose control of it.
Yeah, fair.
But I mean, he doesn't usually get hit by it. If they have a lot of shooting, maybe it's not smart to put it out, because you're going to have to stick around closer to the spell than we previously would, where you could just teleport away afterwards. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I would have taken the Warp Lightning Vortex perhaps to keep using, but you're just not allowed. So
yeah. No, I like this a lot. The command rate makes perfect sense here as well. It's funny how it kind of allows you to just take an entire sub-faction simply because that command trait exists, right?
Yeah, it frees you up, and it's giving me extra CP every turn too. So that's 10 extra, max 10 extra CPs for those Thunderers. So they're that big block's getting on +1 to hit at all times, and then against the big unit you want to be targeting +1 to wound. So
I wish they gave that kind of command trace to more books.
Yeah, that enables new battle lines.
Yeah.
They've got one in the Ogre's book, but I don't know if I've seen it in many other places.
Yeah, for Lumineth, a lot of us were actually hoping that there would be a way to get Dawn Riders as battle line. That would be so cool if it was just a command trait that you could take on, let's say, a Lord Regent or something.
Oh yeah, so you could have an all cavalry without having to take wardens.
Yep.
Yeah, that'd be cool for sure.
Okay, but two very different lists, and I kind of like them both. I'm actually very curious to play against both of these. I think both are very scary in very different ways, as you mentioned. Um, I'd probably feel more confident playing against this one. I don't even know why, but I feel like the damage here is a little more like steadily paced,
Yeah.
while the first one is very bursty.
Yeah, and with everyone fighting first in coming out of a frigate,
Yeah.
you're kind of getting a KO version of Beastclaw Raiders,
Yeah.
where that charge is really what you're trying to avoid, and you really have to screen out for it. But remember, we have shooting too,
Yeah, that's
so
true.
maybe we remove the screens and then yeah, and then do some bombs and all that stuff. So
Yeah,
it
curious. I think next time that we see each other, we should try to get a game in with one of these lists, maybe.
gosh, but we've got so many so many lists we've been trying to get.
It's
We
also true.
we haven't done Zinch yet either, but you play Zinch a good bit, so
Yeah.
we'll mix it up.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Moving on to the last slides.
Yeah.
Okay, so in conclusion, Ryan, tell us what do you think about well, probably mostly the internal balance, because externally it's probably a little bit early to tell, but what are your first impressions for balance-wise for both internally and externally?
I mean, I'm still a stan for what GW is doing with third edition Battletome. I really feel like the trend here has been trying to make internal balance within books better. I don't care if they don't bring out a lot of new. Um, I much rather than balance the books, and this is a great example of doing that. I feel like KO now feels like it can live outside of Barak Zilfin, outside of one or two builds. It's less I think it's going to be less frustrating to play against. It's going to feel more fair, and like you said, playing with the same rules everyone else is playing with. And in that sense, that's also an external. It is an external balance thing. I think people are going to not roll their eyes as much playing this army, because it only gets that one teleport a turn, and the shooting is going to be strong when it needs to be strong. But we don't have anything that feels super overpowered. I think with the shooting, you can stack some rend a little bit, but there's always risk reward there with the Purple Sun, with the once per game with the Admiral. I don't see a lot of the profiles got more consistent with the shooting profiles, but they didn't necessarily get more scary. I think scarier outside of a couple exceptions, but there's no spam long strikes list that we have, and the boats aren't pulling their weight when it comes to how many points they bring as far as shooting is concerned. The frigates, I think you're going to see a lot of frigates, and I think that people are definitely going to be trying out this. So as far as the meta is concerned, this is definitely something you're going to start seeing as though it's a whole new army. I don't feel like this is the KO of the last book at all. I feel like it's got a Sylvaneth level reboot, maybe Slaves level reboot.
Yeah.
In terms of, and every unit in the book is good. It has its reason for being taken, even if I didn't talk about it today.
Yeah, it's very cool. I look forward to playing against these guys much more now, honestly.
Yeah, me too. Honestly, it doesn't feel as kind of like when I got shut down with that Zinch list when I was being broadcast on the Honest Wargamers coverage.
Yeah.
That was the worst game I've played in ages, and no fun at all. And that was against KO. So I'm really excited, and I'm excited to see if I can take this to Worlds. I wanna give it, after this Lumineth tournament's done. I want to see what I can pull out with the KO in the time that I've got before we have to submit lists a couple months in advance, and see how it goes.
Yeah.
What?
It's just certain phrases, because I'm not a native speaker. Certain phrases just remind me of things, like when you say the time that I've got, it almost sounds like you're dying.
Yeah, well, the time I've got to try it out. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and with that, we've reached the end of our show with a different art, because different army, right? It's very up in your face, this art, right?
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you guys for watching, and Ryan, thank you for such a massive review of this book. You did so much work on this one. Once again, thank you very much.
Sure thing. Looking forward to maybe making one of those strategy videos where I talk about exiting the boat with the Sky Wardens.
Let's just call it that as well. Exiting the boat with the Sky Wardens. Nothing else.
Yeah.
Exit boat strategies.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you everyone for watching. Please do feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, or a like and subscribe. Please share it around your gaming group as well. It helps the channel a tremendous amount, and it might motivate Ryan to finally make an actual strategy guide other than very other cool videos as well. Ryan's also doing a Math Hammer series that he's quite far into, I guess, but you've still got a lot of more plans, right?
A lot more, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously we're still trying to put out some content on a regular, but always content that feels well thought out. So we're kind of past that point where we're trying to put out a video every week just for timing's sake. So every time you're seeing a video from us, it's going to be a video that we really want to make for quality. I hope you've liked and enjoyed this video, and if you did, you can always visit us in the Discord and have a chat with us there. See you guys in the next one.